Hey, tonight we slip through a creaking wooden door that never should have opened, into a chamber hung with velvet and lit by flickering tallow candles. The tapestries are moth-eaten, yes, but their images still dance in the light-hunting scenes. Wild boar pierced by spears, ladies in stiff bodices, with smiles too tight. And there, nestled behind a curtain of politics and dust, a girl waits. She's not yet the queen, not yet the myth. She's just Elizabeth 16, brilliant, and already more dangerous than most monarchs twice her age. You stand at the edge of her world, one toe in, and already it's too late. Because this world, it whispers to you, it lies, and sometimes it loves you only to ruin you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where are you listening from, and what time is it for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through Greenwich Palace in spring, the air still sharp with the last breath of March. Elizabeth is in the royal nursery, but this is no crib-bound child. Her tutors complain that she learns Latin faster than they can teach it. Her half-brother Edward is sickly. Her sister Mary is brooding and bitter. But Elizabeth, she sparkles, not from joy, but from calculation. She already knows that to survive here is to outthink everyone. You sit near her as she reads Cicero by candlelight. She traces the lines with ink-stained fingers, mouthing the Latin silently. The court thinks she's merely bookish, but you see, it's she's arming herself. Ideas will be her armor, words, her weapons, love. That's the blade that will keep nicking her skin for decades. The first cut comes with Thomas Seymour. You remember him, brother to Jane Seymour, the queen who died giving birth to Edward VI. Thomas is handsome, vain, and recluser, walking red flag. When Elizabeth's father dies, Seymour marries the widowed Queen Catherine Parr, and Elizabeth, now 13, moves into their household. That's when things get slippery. Seymour begins making early morning visits to Elizabeth's chamber. Sometimes he's just playing, tickling her, tearing her gown in jest. Sometimes Catherine joins in laughing, trying to normalize what is, even by Tudor standards, deeply weird. You watch it unfold like a slow-motion fall. Elizabeth's governess, Cat Ashley, grows nervous. She warns Seymour to stop. He doesn't. Elizabeth starts leaving her door unlocked, or locked too late. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth was a victim or a participant, manipulated or flirting back. She was 13, but she was also Tudor-raised in a court where survival often meant seduction. Still, the imbalance is stark. He's a grown man, a privy councillor, her legal guardian, and the rumours spread like plague. Catherine Parr, pregnant and furious, sends Elizabeth away. That separation likely saves Elizabeth's future and, perhaps, her life. But the damage, it's already threading through her. You see it in the way she keeps her thoughts pressed between her teeth from then on, the glances she avoids, the way she really learns not to trust desire. The political storm brews fast. Seymour, now widowed Catherine, dies in childbirth, tries to marry Elizabeth next. He even tries to kidnap the king. You probably won't survive this, you think, if you were a lesser Tudor caught in that whirlpool. He's arrested, accused of treason. The council hauls Elizabeth in for questioning, and now you sit in that dark room, the interrogation chamber. She's 15, but she doesn't fidget, doesn't cry. Her words are measured, polite, maddeningly opaque. They ask if she planned to marry Seymour, if she loved him. "I do not know how to make windows into men's hearts," she replies. It is a masterclass in evasion. She denies just enough, reveals just enough. The men old, grizzled, suspicious leave the room, unsure if she's a fool or a genius. She's neither, she's just alive. And in Tudor England, that's rare enough. One of her maids, however, spills everything. Talks of Seymour visiting in his nightgown, the torn dresses, the flirtations. You watch Elizabeth's face as she hears this betrayal. It's not shock, it's lesson learned. She emerges from the scandal bruised but not broken. Seymour is executed. Elizabeth walks away free, not innocent, perhaps, but untouched by the blade. After that, you notice how she moves differently, how her voice sharpens. She starts using the word no like a sword. She never again lets a man get that close without a fight. And you're standing in the corridor, watching the door close behind her. It doesn't slam, that would be too obvious. It clicks, quiet. Final dot, the Tower of London, where her mother was beheaded, and she herself will one day be imprisoned, looms in the distance. For now, she's just a girl with a scar you can't see. But one day, that scar will wear a crown. You're walking through the gardens at Chelsea Manor now, damp leaves sticking to your boots as the shadows of treason stretch like vines across the path. Somewhere behind a curtained window, Elizabeth peers through the glass. She's returned to quiet life, or at least the performance of it. But inside, the gears of her mind are worry again, faster than ever. And then he comes back, Thomas Seymour. Somehow, still charming, still dangerous. You'd think being arrested and accused of conspiracy would dampen a man's libido, but not Thomas. He thinks he's untouchable, thinks he can spin his way into Elizabeth's bed, or better yet, onto her throne. You stand in the corner as his letters arrive, carefully worded, but heavy with intent. He flatters her, whispers futures she barely allows herself to imagine. He's lost his wife, yes, but not his ambition, and Elizabeth. She's 15, caught between instinct and calculation. She gives nothing away. To her household, she's cool, focused on her studies. Only Cat Ashley sees the flicker in her eyes when his name is spoken, and then the Privy Council begins to poke again. The rumours never really stopped. Someone says they saw Seymour send Elizabeth a jewel. Someone else claims they heard him promise her marriage. You follow her down the corridor of Whitehall, her slippers silent on the cold floor. They summon her again. More questions, always more questions. She answers with care. "I do not remember. It may have been so. I cannot say for certain." She's 15 and learning the greatest Tudor skill, to say something and nothing all at once. Now pause here, just a moment, tilt your head, because here's something odd. Seymour, despite the scandal, remains popular with certain nobles. He's charming, remember. He throws money around, hosts wild dinners. One source even claims he kept a pet lion. A lion in London. Can you imagine? Poor beast, stuck with Seymour for a master. But even lions can't protect fools. The moment Seymour is caught trying to break into the king's apartments, yes. Break in, sword in hand, his fate is sealed. The council orders his execution. Elizabeth is suddenly one conversation away from being branded his co-conspirator. They lock her in her room. Her maids are taken for questioning. Ashley weeps. Her tutor cries for her innocence. And Elizabeth, she stares at the wall, You stand with her, pressed in by silence. The same stone walls that once held Anne Boleyn now watch her daughter hold her breath. You know what she's thinking, how close she is to her mother's fate, how thin the line is between flirtation and the scaffold. But she survives. Seymour does not. You're at the execution now. It's a cold March morning, the grass still crusted with frost. Seymour walks to the block with a swagger, tossing coins to the crowd. As if charm can cheat death, it cannot. The axe falls. Back at Chelsea, Elizabeth doesn't flinch when she hears the news. One maid swears, she whispered, better him than me. Another claims she went pale and fainted. Historians still argue whether she grieved, whether some soft part of her heart cracked that morning, or if she had long since turned it to iron. What's certain is this: after Seymour's death, she never again trusts that desire alone is safe. Years pass. The court shifts. Edward VI grows weaker. Mary sharpens her knives. And Elizabeth studies, waits, endures. But the Seymour affair follows her like a ghost. Every suitor that comes after will be measured against that reckless man who made her laugh and nearly cost her her life. You watch her polish her image with care. No more scandals, no more door unlocking at dawn. She learns to write in riddles, to flirt with her eyes but not her fingers, to wear mourning black even when she's celebrating. It's all armor now, and here's your quirky tidbit of the night. After Seymour's death, a poem is found scratched into the wood of his chamber wall. Something about love, betrayal, and the weight of ambition. Some say he wrote it. Others claim it was Elizabeth, slipping into his rooms one last time before the guards sealed them shut. No one knows for sure. You step away from the window now. Chelsea's garden is quiet, the petals drooping in early evening dew. Elizabeth is once again alone, but she is not broken. You feel her breath steadying in the darkness. The lesson has been learned. She can want, but she must never need. Not openly, not fatally. You look at her now, this teenage survivor of royal disaster, and you realize something chilling. She's ready for the throne. Not yet, but ready for the game. The one where love is power, and power is never free. And as she curls back into her bed, a book pressed against her chest, and the whisper of her mother's ghost barely brushing her thoughts, she does not cry. She does not smile, she simply waits. Because the next chapter is already turning. You're walking through the gallery at Hatfield House now. Cool stone beneath your feet, and a scent in the air that's somewhere between parchment and damp rushes. The windows are tall, the light pale and unforgiving. Elizabeth sits at a long oak table, her hands folded neatly. She's 16, maybe 17, and she's just been summoned. The knock at the door isn't loud, but it might as well be thunder, because this isn't just another court summons. This is interrogation. The council has fresh questions again, and this time they want more than silence. They want guilt, a confession, something to pin on her and fold neatly into the growing pile of scandals surrounding Thomas Seymour's failed conspiracy. You follow her into the small room, walls lined with damp wood and 2 hard chairs. No fire burns in the hearth. The interrogators. Robert Dudley sits with quill in hand, ready to record her downfall in real time. But she doesn't give him one. You listen to the same words over and over. I do not remember. I cannot tell. I think not. So a less clever girl would stumble. She doesn't. Her answers are maddening in their precision. You watch the man across from her grow red-faced. He wants her to be the helpless girl everyone imagines when they say princess, but she's not that. She's a coiled spring in a velvet gown. She never says she loved Seymour. Never says she didn't. She says nothing useful. Kat Ashley and her co-conspirator, Blanche Parry, are not so lucky. They spill everything. How Seymour flirted. How Elizabeth giggled. How often he visited, and how late. You want to scream because even loyalty has its limits, and theirs is unraveling fast. The more her women talk, the tighter the noose around Elizabeth's neck becomes. Still, she says nothing. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's silence was strategy or trauma. Did she suppress her emotions, or simply outplay everyone in the room? You might never know, but here's something you can believe. Elizabeth didn't just survive that year. She learned from it. After the final inquiry ends, she walks out of the room alone. No attendants, no weeping. Just a slight twitch at the corner of her mouth that could be amusement, or the ghost of a smirk. You walk beside her down the gallery, footsteps echoing. Behind you, Towit is still sitting, ink-stained and exhausted, and as the scandal fizzles, not for lack of interest, but for lack of evidence, you realize something strange is happening. The public begins to change its mind. Elizabeth is no longer the scheming teenage temptress. Now she's the girl who was almost ruined but wasn't. The one who escaped the villain's grip, who walked away untouched, unclaimed, and strangely powerful. A dangerous story begins to form. You see it in portraits, hastily painted, her in black. Eyes too large, lips pursed like secrets kept in glass. You hear it in ballads sung in taverns. The Maiden of the Tower, the Red Fox and the Golden Doe. Silly titles, but they stick. And now for a little detour. You know that Elizabeth started developing her own clothing designs around this time. Yes, sketching ruffs and sleeves, embroidering sleeves with hidden meanings, even stitching snakes and thorns into her bodices. Not just fashion, messaging, a second language, one she would use for decades. A fringe theory suggests that one gown she designed during the aftermath of the Seymour scandal was embroidered with silver tears and little stitched flames. Grief and danger, dignity on fire. No one can prove it, of course, but if any teenage girl was dressing like a secret battle flag, it was Elizabeth. Now, let's not pretend the court forgave her immediately. Oh no. Some whispered that she had been Seymour's lover, others that she had lured him into treason, and still others said she would never marry because her heart was buried in Seymour's grave. None of them were right. None of them were wrong. You're at Whitehall again. A new season. The air smells of thawing earth and roasted almonds from a nearby feast. Elizabeth stands before the mirror. Older now, not old, just sharper. She stares at her reflection, one eye narrowed. She doesn't smile. Instead, she adjusts the brooch at her collar. A phoenix, you remember it from your school books. The mythical bird that burns itself to ash and rises again. Yeah, she knows what she's doing. You watch as she turns from the mirror. Behind her, a fire glows low. She doesn't look back. And just like that, the girl who nearly lost her crown to a reckless romance walks forward closer to the one she will one day become, the woman who trusts no one, the woman who loves like a general, the woman who will rule alone, but not yet. Not quite. You still have to pass through a dozen courtships, a handful of dead queens, and a few very stupid men before that crown settles on her head. For now, though the Seymour affair is over, and so is her childhood. You're standing in a silent hallway, your fingertips brushing the cool, carved stone of the Palace of Woodstock. Rain spatters against the leaded glass. Elizabeth is 20 now, a prisoner again, officially, of course. But the guards are real, the door's locked. And when you're held on suspicion of treason by your own sister, it hardly matters what the letter of the law says. Queen Mary sits on the throne now, and she burns Protestants for sport. Elizabeth, heir, presumptive and famously Protestant herself, is not just inconvenience, she's terrifying. You move with her through the long days of her house arrest. There's no music, no courtly games, no poetry, just the creak of old wood, the heavy stomp of guards on rotation, and the constant weight of being watched. And it's here, trapped in this in-between space, that Elizabeth does something remarkable. She chooses celibacy, not just in body, but in myth. She begins to spin the story of herself as the virgin princess, not because she's afraid of desire, not because she's inexperienced, but because the very act of not loving becomes her greatest weapon. You watch her write letters to her sister, full of trembling humility and glittering subtext. "I crave to live only to serve your majesty," she writes. "But between the lines, I will outlast you." And when rumors swirl out and they do that she's secretly in love with this nobleman or that clerk, she neither confirms nor denies. She lets the whispers twist themselves into knots. Her silence is strategic, a mystery too delicate to unravel. Historians still argue whether she took any lovers during these quiet years, whether there was a secret tryst with a sympathetic jailer, or a series of stolen glances across gardens patrolled by armed men. No proof survives, only speculation and Elizabeth's own maddening control of her image. And yet, one thing is clear, her heart still wanders back to one man, Robert Dudley. You've met him already in passing, but now he takes center stage, tall, dark, handsome, yes, but more than that, he's the son of a disgraced traitor, a boy who was nearly executed alongside his father. He and Elizabeth were children together in the Tower, bonded by fear, raised under the same shadow of suspicion. You with them now in a sunlit courtyard. Sometime after her release, he catches her eye. She doesn't look away. It's not dramatic, just the kind of charged glance that tells you this isn't the beginning. It never really ended. Dudley, like Elizabeth, knows what it means to walk the razor's edge of treason. But unlike her, he's bold, reckless, where she chooses calculation, he chooses fire. And that fire, it draws her. When Mary's health begins to fail, and it does, quickly Elizabeth's path becomes clear. The court begins to shift. People hedge their bets, and Dudley, he becomes the first to wager everything on her. You watch as he begins spending more time in her orbit, not just socially, but intimately. He's there in her private chambers, at her side in processions, always close, always ready, and others take note, including Mary. You're in the royal chapel when Elizabeth kneels beside her half-sister, the Virgin Quintaby, beside the Catholic Queen who will die childless. It's a quiet moment, a dangerous one. Mary leans close and says, "You will not rule if you displease God." Translation: keep your skirts shut and your tongue silent. Elizabeth nods, smiles, says nothing. But inside, you feel it, that iron rising again now, a curious detail. During this period, Elizabeth begins to commission her own personal mottos. She chooses Latin phrases, semper idem, always the same. Video, et taceo, I see and say nothing. And then there's one, embroidered onto a handkerchief, gifted to her most trusted maid, much suspected by me, nothing proved can be. Subtle, right? Just a casual flex of innocence wrapped in passive aggression. It's the start of what will become her most enduring defense mechanism, turning every accusation into an opportunity to withhold, not deny, just obscure. When Mary finally dies, in 1558, Elizabeth rises, not just politically, but symbolically. A new queen, unmarried, unclaimed, untouchable. You're there as she receives the crown. The Archbishop of Canterbury hesitating just slightly before placing it on her head because she is, after all, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, and England doesn't forget. But she smiles, not with warmth, with calculation, because now everything changes. Dudley becomes master of the horse and intimate post. He moves into apartments next to hers. They dine together, ride together, pray, sometimes, together. You're there the first time she lets him brush her glove with his lips. So slight it might be imagined, but it's not. The court sees. The rumours spark like kindling, and Elizabeth, she does nothing to stop them, because she's no longer a girl locked in a manor house. She's the queen, and love is no longer danger, it's strategy. You're walking the inner chambers of Whitehall now, where the air always smells faintly of beeswax and burnt tallow. The ceilings are high, the windows thick with years of grime and gossip. Servants pass without speaking. Courtiers smile too. Wide, and always, Robert Dudley is nearby. You don't need a map to find him. Just follow Elizabeth's eyes. By now, it's impossible to pretend they're merely friends. Their closeness is undeniable. Morning rides alone, late-night chess games, matching colour schemes at court. Even their dogs begin to resemble one another. And you're right there beside them at court banquets, watching how her laughter grows warmer when he enters, how his hand brushes her sleeve a little too long, how, when they dance, their bodies are already writing a language the courtiers aren't yet fluent in. But remember the game we're in. Elizabeth is Queen of England now, and England is suspicious. A single misstep, a kiss seen at the wrong angle, a letter intercepted, a bedshed even in rumour, and everything could collapse. She's not just a woman in love. She's the state, and the state doesn't blush. That's where the real performance begins. You see it in how she conducts her court. One moment, she makes eyes at Dudley from behind a goblet of Rhenish wine. The next, she coldly dismisses his proposal in front of foreign ambassadors. She builds tension, unspools it just enough to tease, like a cat with ribbon, like a queen with a kingdom watching. Still, the people begin to whisper. And not just idle gossip, dangerous whispers. Is Dudley the power behind the throne? Will Elizabeth marry him and make him king? What will Spain say? What will Parliament do? You linger near the great tapestries, listening, and then you hear it. A scream, no, not at court. Far away, in a small country manor, Amy Robsart Dudley is dead. You freeze, because yes, Dudley is married. You haven't seen her. Few have. She lives in the countryside, quiet and mostly ignored, while her husband climbs ever closer to the Queen's side. And now she's dead. Found at the bottom of a staircase with her neck broken. Just like that, everything shifts. The rumours roar into full flame. You watch Dudley's face at court, pale, his smile gone. He claims innocence, that he wasn't there, that it was a tragic accident. But no one believes in accidents when power and ambition swirl like this. Elizabeth retreats to her private rooms for days. No audiences, no councils, just silence. You're there in the privy chamber, dimly lit and thick with candle smoke, as she reads the report. She fell, it says. The stairs were shallow. No sign of struggle, but you feel the weight behind her eyes. She knows what this looks like, that even if she had no hand in Amy's death, there's no proof she did it. Doesn't matter. The court has already drawn its conclusions. Historians still argue about Amy Dudley's fall. Was it an accident? Suicide? Murder orchestrated? By Robert or someone else entirely, hoping to ruin him? There were no witnesses, no servants nearby, just a broken body and a husband who stood too close to the sun, and Elizabeth. She understands the cost instantly. She cannot marry Dudley now, even if she loves him, even if he's her only match in wit, spirit, and ambition. Even if she had imagined just once what it might be like to have him beside her in bed, in power, in all of it. No, that door is closed. So what does she do? She distances herself, not coldly, not cruelly, but with surgical precision. She keeps him close at court, grants him honors, seats him high, but marriage, out of the question. Any alliance with him now would confirm the worst fears of the court. And she is not Anne Boleyn reborn. She will not be undone by love. Here's something oddly sweet. Though Dudley doesn't leave, not really, he stays at her side. For decades, he remarries badly, he fights wars poorly, but he never stops loving her, not even when his health fails. You peek at one of his letters, sent to her years later. I do but kiss your sweet hands, he writes, wishing you all the happiness that your loving heart can hold. You fold it back up and slip it beneath her pillow, and here's a quirky fringe tidbit for tonight. After Amy's death, some claimed her ghost haunted Dudley for the rest of his life, that she appeared in his bedchamber at night, head turned sharply to the side, as if forever frozen in her final fall. Whether Dudley believed it or not, he never spoke of her again. Elizabeth, for her part, mourned Amy's death publicly. She condemned the rumors. She promised to investigate, but privately. She wrote nothing, at least. Nothing that survived. You're standing now at the edge of a great masquerade ball, years after the scandal. Elizabeth wears white and silver virginal colors, but adorned with pearls arranged in the shape of crescent moons. She looks like purity distilled. But her eyes, you've seen them before, and you know what she's thinking. Dudley moves toward her across the floor. He bows. She nods, and for a moment the world forgets how dangerous love has become. Then the music begins, and the masks go on. You're awake in the privy chamber before dawn. Fog rising thick and cold outside the mullioned windows, while Elizabeth paces in her stockinged feet. The fire has long since died. No music plays, only the faint scratch of her nails against the embroidered sleeve of her gown, and the occasional sightite, careful, almost imperceptible. She hasn't slept. Neither have you, because the decision is made. She will not marry Robert Dudley, not now, not ever, and yet he remains, always, just behind her shoulder, always standing when she enters, always staring with that expression that knows too much, wants too much, and will never, ever stop hoping. You see her brush past him at a council meeting, her hand just grazing the curve of his wrist. It's gone in a heartbeat, but the court sees, the ambassadors see, and their pens twitch like antennae, writing letters to France and Spain with breathless concern. The Queen remains unmarried, and Dudley still too close. So what does Elizabeth do? She turns the scandal into spectacle. You're there in the great hall of Hampton Court when she appears in full regalia, her bodice stiff with gold, her hair coiled like a halo, and that infamous diamond-studded serpent clasped at her throat. She raises a hand. The room falls silent, and she announces she is wedded, not to any man, to England. It lands like thunder. But soft strange, how both things can exist together. The nobles blink, unsure if it's performance or policy. The foreign envoys write home, in agitation, but the people, they swoon. The Virgin Queen is born not from purity, but from strategy. And you watch as the myth begins to breathe. Here's the mainstream, historical truth. Elizabeth carefully cultivated the idea that she could marry at any moment should she find someone worthy. This kept the other European powers dangling, hoping. For alliance, marriage was leverage, and Elizabeth, more than any monarch before or since, never spent it. But behind the gowns and the speeches, the longing hasn't died. You sit with her later that night, her lady's gone, her hair loosened. A letter lies on her lap, Dudley's handwriting. Bold, familiar. She doesn't open it, just stares at the wax seal. Then, with slow fingers, she tucks it into a drawer she later lock and have melted down. The cost of being untouchable is, of course, never being touched, and now the suitors arrive. Tall ones, short ones, French ones with strange accents, and Spanish ones with eyes that promise murder, each bearing letters, portraits, some a dagger wrapped in velvet, just in case things go sideways. Elizabeth entertains them all, not sincerely, not ever, but with just enough warmth to keep them circling. There's one in particular, Archduke Charles of Austria. You remember him from the portraits, long-nosed, jaw like a pickaxe, not a hint of humour in his eyes. Negotiations drag on for years. Elizabeth calls him my frog. She nearly marries him. Then doesn't, then maybe does. Then doesn't again. She strings him along for a decade. Historians still argue whether she ever seriously considered it, or if she was simply playing chess while the men around her thought it was checkers. And yet, as Charles fades, Dudley remains. It's maddening. Even the court poet Edmund Spenser eventually pens lines warning against the Queen's scorn of marriage. Some say he means it kindly, others think he was trying to shame her. Either way, Elizabeth has no patience for sermons. Here's your quirky moment of the night. Elizabeth commissions a miniature portrait of herself painted on a nut, a literal walnut shell, no bigger than a locket. Inside, her image in regal armor. Outside, nothing but polished wood. She gives it to no one. It sits, tucked inside a silk pouch, buried in a chest of Latin manuscripts and dried rose petals. You see it only once, when she fingers it absent-mindedly during a sermon on wifely obedience. She doesn't laugh. She just closes the box. Still, despite the public denials, the rumours keep rising like steam from a kettle, especially when Dudley is granted a new title, Earl of Leicester, and given apartments so close to hers that they practically share a ceiling. For an ambassador's fume, Parliament begs her to wed. Even her own council grows anxious. So what does Elizabeth do? She announces a new marriage possibility to the Duke of Anjou, yes, Francois, the French frog prince, younger brother of the King of France, Catholic, pocked by smallpox, short, sharp-witted, and half her age. You stare at her. She's serious. You watch Dudley's jaw clench like steel when Anjou arrives in England wearing a yellow doublet and An eye patch? No, really. The man is charming, ridiculous, and apparently enchanted by Elizabeth, and she almost says yes. This isn't a drill. She dances with him, walks with him, accepts a ring. The court reels. Dudley sulks. England panics. But then, just as quickly, she pulls back. Historians still argue whether she ever intended to marry Anjou, whether she truly wept when he returned to France, or whether the tears were part of the mask. But this much is certain: the drama worked. She reminded everyone that she could choose love, and reminded Dudley that she could leave him behind, but she never did. You see them again one late spring evening, walking the palace gardens in silence. No touching, no words, just two people who once stood on the edge of something and never quite jumped. They pass beneath a flowering tree, and the petals fall like confetti at a wedding that never was. You're seated now on a velvet-cushioned stool in the outer chamber of Elizabeth's private apartments. The light is low, filtered through panes of coloured glass that tint the room in moody reds and purples. Everything smells faintly of lavender, ink, and secrets. Behind the next-door solid oak, heavily guarded us, where the real power plays unfold. And tonight, it's not about diplomacy. It's about protection, specifically the Privy Chamber. This is where no ambassador enters, no court gossip freely wanders. Only her most trusted women, only her most silent men, the ones who know when to speak, when to vanish, and when to carry messages no one ever signed. You slip through, it's quieter here. There are no trumpets, no pearls on display, no grand speeches, but make no mistake, this is the real court. Elizabeth, still draped in silk but barefoot now, lounges on a low chair near the fire. One of her ladies brushes her hair, another stitches silver thread into a slipper. Dudley isn't here tonight. He knows better than to intrude without invitation, but the walls, they still whisper his name. You notice it in the way the other courtiers pause when they mention him. How his gifts always perfectly chosen, never to lavish rive with no notes, only silence. One day it's a pair of gloves lined with sable, the next a locket of amber inlaid with an opal, said to reflect the true nature of the heart. Or so he wrote years ago. But Elizabeth keeps these trinkets tucked away, not flaunted, not worn, and yet she never throws them out. You watch her closely now, every gesture measured, every silence deliberate. This isn't indecision, it's strategy. She's crafting a persona, one so finely tuned that even her most intimate companions can't quite tell where the woman ends and the queen begins. One fringe theory suggests that Elizabeth had a hidden passage constructed between her own apartments and Dudley's, allowing late-night visits with no witnesses. There's no firm proof, only blueprints that don't match and servants who died too conveniently to be questioned. Historians still argue whether these meetings ever happened. But you feel it, standing here in the glow of firelight and half-spoken words, something did still. You can't ignore the tension this closeness causes. Members of her council grow restless. William Cecil, her oldest advisor, warns her privately. Too much time with Dudley, too much intimacy, too many risks. And yet, she doesn't send Dudley away. She sends them. One by one, those who press too hard are given extended diplomatic missions, or coldly rebuked, or simply ignored, because the Privy Chamber doesn't answer to Parliament, and neither does Elizabeth now. Let's indulge in one of the more peculiar rituals of her inner court, the morning dressing ceremony. It's not just putting on a gown-knits performance, audience, and theatre rolled into one. Her ladies gather before dawn. Every item is inspected, every choice symbolic. A black ribbon means mourning, pearls mean purity, rubies, defiance, and Dudley often sends fabric samples for her gowns. Gold brocade from Venice. Damask so fine it rustles like paper when she moves. The messages are clear but coded. He is helping shape the Queen's body, even if he no longer touches it. One morning, you watch her pause before choosing a particularly dramatic rough sew. Large, it forces her chin skyward. A defensive choice. Surely you think of it as armor. And if the dressing room is the forge, the privy chamber is the war room. Here, secrets are planned. Lovers are discussed. Enemies are disarmed without swords ever leaving their sheaths. One afternoon, a foreign envoy stumbles upon Elizabeth here, laughing in an undershift, hair unbraided, eating candied ginger and teasing her ladies. He reports home in stunned awe. The Queen is like a goddess at play, mortal yet untouchable. And it's true, she cultivates that contradiction deliberately. You'd think it would be lonely, this tightrope act between desire and denial. And it is, but she keeps a tight circle of women to whom she entrusts her thoughts. Or parts of them. Kat Ashley, her old governess, is still here, still watching, still warning when the line between affection and danger begins to blur. Blanche Parry, too, quiet, observant, the kind of woman who can deliver a love letter without letting her pulse rise. You watch them watch her. They know her patterns. When she's about to rage, when she's about to soften, when she misses Dudley but won't say his name. They're not just maids, they're mirrors. And sometimes dash walls, because no one gets into that final inner room without them knowing. Here's your quirky detail of the night. Elizabeth was said to have a bed with silver bell tassels that jingled every time someone approached. No one could enter her chamber without her knowing. Even when asleep, the Queen was never unguarded, and as you settle into the privy chamber's deep, listening quiet, you begin to understand the great paradox of her reign. She is never alone, and yet no one is ever truly with her. That includes Robert Dudley. He comes and goes, sometimes honored, sometimes coldly ignored. Once she banishes him from court for 3 months without a word. When he returns, he wears a black ribbon at his throat. They say she never asked him why, because she already knew. So tonight, you sit in the chamber of velvet secrets and scent, and you understand. This is not a love story, not in the traditional sense. It is a power story, a survival story, a performance so flawless, no one's sure anymore where Elizabeth Tudor went and where Gloriana began. But there is still warmth here, still a heartbeat beneath the brocade, still a woman barefoot, fire-lit, and thinking of a man who sleeps just one room too far away. You're awake again while drifting. You're tucked into a dim corner of the court's grand hall, but tonight it feels cavernous, not crowded. Candles flicker along the tapestries. Wind hums through stone cracks. The pageantry is on pause. And all the masks are off, because tonight is after the accident. You hear it first as murmurs, soft, shifting, careful. People don't say his name. They say that man, or her favorite, or, in harsher tones, the scandal. It's September 1560, and Amy Robsart is dead. You didn't expect it. No one did, or everyone did, depending on whom you ask. Robert Dudley's wife, remember her? The pale, sickly woman tucked away at Cumnor Place while he danced at court. Yes, her Dot. She was found at the bottom of a staircase, her neck broken. Number. Witnesses, no struggle. No note, and just like that, the castle you've been tiptoeing through for nights now shifts, groans, and threatens to collapse. You're sitting in the chapel gallery where Elizabeth retreats to cry, or not cry, hard to say. She stares at the stained glass saints as if waiting for one of them to break rank and speak. Historians still argue. You hear a scholar whisper behind a curtain whether Elizabeth knew what was coming, whether she allowed it, or whether it broke her heart. Because here's the thing. With Amy gone, there was technically nothing standing between Elizabeth and Dudley anymore, except absolutely everything. You're in the presence of a queen now, haunted by optics. She knows what people think, that she plotted Amy's fall, that Dudley arranged it, that their hunger for each other outweighed their decency. But you've watched her too, long now to believe in such clumsy cruelty. This isn't a woman who tumbles into scandal. She tames scandal. Still, that didn't stop the rumors. Foreign ambassadors gossiped gleefully. The Spanish ambassador called the situation a disgrace to the crown. Catholic factions seized on it, painting Elizabeth as a Jezebel in gold lace. Even members of her inner circle began to pull back. Her court froze, and Dudley, well, he stayed close. Too close. Elizabeth didn't banish him, but she didn't crown him either. You hear her pacing at night, stone floor, bare feet, that soft slap of skin against chill. It's the sound of indecision, or maybe clarity, because here comes the part you won't survive. She could have married him, she had that power, but if she did diff, she let love dictate. Her next move, everything she built might have crumbled. The Protestant allies, gone. The nobles revolted. The public, furious. Love is a dangerous throne, mate. So instead, she stalls. She appoints Dudley to the Privy Council, a sop to his pride. She elevates his titles, buys him a castle, and then she keeps him at arm's length. An embrace frozen in political amber. You ride with her on progress that year, out to the countryside. It's supposed to be a healing tour, but every town whispers the same question, will she'll marry him now? In one village, a child presents Elizabeth with a hand-drawn portrait, her and Dudley, side by side, crowns on their heads. Elizabeth smiles, kisses the child's cheek, and quietly asks a lady-in-waiting to destroy the sketch before nightfall, not out of shame, out of calculation. You visit Cumnor Place just once. It's empty now. Curtains torn down. Amy's chamber cold. There's still a cracked mirror above the hearth, as if something tried to scream through the glass and was stopped just short. Local legend says her ghost walks the stairwell every Michaelmas. Quirky detail. In the months after Amy's death, the stairs where she fell were dismantled, not renovated, not repaired, just removed, like they were afraid she'd fall again. Back at court, Dudley becomes something of a phantom himself. He's still there, of course, always there, but his laugh is thinner, his confidence more strained. And Elizabeth, she leans harder into spectacle, more gowns, more pageants, more portraits showing her as Diana, as Astrea, as Gloriana reborn. You see it now. She's building distance in full view of the world, dressing her pain in myth. One morning you find her alone in the gardens. The roses are nearly done blooming, fat petals falling like tired secrets. She plucks one, Do you think they'll ever stop asking about him? She murmurs. You don't answer. She doesn't expect you to. That same week, she does something no one expects. She begins negotiations with foreign princes. Marriage negotiations. Not serious ones, not at first, but serious enough to remind the world that she is sovereign, that her body is not Robert Dudley's playground, that she can still command alliances without romance. One suitor is the Archduke Charles of Austria, a Habsburg, too Catholic, too serious, too slow. Still, she flirts with the idea, even pens letters, not because she marry him, but because talking about marrying him is more powerful than any ring. You start to understand the rhythm now. Every time the whispers rise, Elizabeth flirts with diplomacy. Every time the court leans too close, she reminds them of the Queen's solitude. And poor Robert, he waits at first eagerly, then anxiously, and finally with something like grief, because even he sees it now. The accident didn't just kill Amy, it killed whatever future he and Elizabeth might have had. You end the evening in the long gallery, watching the Queen's shadow stretch down the marble floor. She walks alone, always, but her shadow that walks beside another. And even if no one dares speak it aloud, you can feel it in the stones themselves. They were too close, and now they'll never be close enough. You're standing in a quiet chamber now, its walls padded with velvet and the scent of old letters. Elizabeth is writing again, always, writing, her quill moving fast across parchment, the strokes elegant but not gentle. Tonight it's not Robert Dudley who occupies her thoughts, but a younger, newer face at court, one with finer French, better legs, and a pedigree crowned in bourbon red dot. Enter the Duke of a NJOU. Or, as she teasingly calls him, my frog. You probably won't survive this courtship, not because it's sordid, but because it's almost too charming to bear. Like watching your crush text a stranger while you pretend not to care. But let's go back a few steps. By the 1570s, Elizabeth is nearly 40. Her flirtations with Dudley have cooled into something more ceremonial-like. A candle lit on an altar that no one dares snuff out. Yet Europe is restless again, Catholic powers prowling. And England needs stronger alliances than winks and Protestant sermons. France dangles an offer, Francis, Duke of Anjou, a royal match, a Catholic one, risky, sure, but thrilling. Anjou is young, clever, and not unattractive. He arrives in England under a halo of diplomacy, but from the moment Elizabeth sees him, everything shifts. You feel it instantly. She laughs too easily. He bows too low. They exchange glances over goblets of wine that last too long and hold too much. He calls her his beldame. She calls him mon petit. Foreign ambassadors scribble furiously into their reports. Mainstream historians agree this flirtation was real. This wasn't just politics. Elizabeth liked him, maybe loved him, but oh, the scandal. A Catholic suitor. The English Parliament nearly chokes. She gets petition after petition, hundreds of signatures, begging her not to marry the French. Papist. Anjou's own reputation doesn't help. He's theatrical, fond of elaborate costumes. Rumors swirl that he wears makeup and keeps a very close inner circle of pretty young men. One fringe theory even suggests he was intersex, a claim born more of xenophobia and misogyny than evidence, but still whispered behind goblets. Yet here's the twist. Elizabeth doesn't care. She enjoys him precisely because he is not England, not Robert, not familiar in his company. She gets to be other, softer, witty, desired, and in turn, Anjou adores her. Not her crown, not her lands, even though she's 2 decades older, even though she could ruin him. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth seriously intended to marry him. Some say yes, she was genuinely in love. Others argue it was all theatre, her most elaborate flirtation. You're standing beside her when she shows Anjou the portrait painted of them together, miniature kept in her private chamber, never shown in court. He touches it gently, like it's a relic, and you wonder, briefly, what their life would have been. What if she'd said yes? She almost did. In 1581, after months of negotiations and endless court gossip, Elizabeth shocks everyone again by publicly considering the match. She even allows Anjou to tour the country with her, visiting nobles and laughing in meadows, like teenagers pretending they're not the focus of international diplomacy. One garden afternoon, he offers her a diamond ring. She doesn't reject it. She wears it that night. A bonfire is lit in the courtyard, people celebrating what they think is an engagement. But the next morning, Elizabeth is distant, withdrawn. She spends hours in her library, staring at a letter half finished. You realize something vital. She wants love, but not the cost. She knows what marriage means: control, compromise, heirs, religion, succession, and she cannot give those things. Not now, maybe not ever. So quietly, heartbreakingly, she says no, gently. She still gives Anjou gifts, still calls him her friend, but he leaves England a bachelor, and when he dies of disease just a few years later, Elizabeth locks herself in her chamber for hours. No one hears her weep, but no one's allowed in either. You spend the evening walking the river path behind Richmond Palace. The willows lean low, a swan glides past, alone. You wonder if this constant giving up is the price of being sovereign, because she could have had love twice now. But once again, she's chosen solitude wrapped in velvet and ceremony. Still, the court whispers. Some say she regrets it, that she kept his portrait until her death, that she'd trace the lines of his cheek with a fingertip some nights, eyes closed, as if conjuring a different ending. Others say she smiled more after he left, as if relieved she hadn't caved. You'll never know for sure, but the next spring, a court masque is staged in her honor, all allegory and glitter. Elizabeth appears as Astrea again, the Virgin Queen, untouched by man, and as she dances, you notice her fingers still bear the ring he gave her. It catches the torchlight for just a second, then it's gone. You wake to the sound of a feather fan brushing softly through the air, a rhythm meant to lull, but tonight it stirs unease, because this next chapter, it's not a love story. Not really. You follow Elizabeth now as she paces her private gallery, shoes clicking faintly against the oak. Her robes shimmer with black velvet and stiff pearls, a silent suit of armor. She's older, now 50 perhaps. Still sharp, still radiant under candlelight, but the softness of the Anjou years is gone, in his place. The Earl of Essex. Oh, you probably won't survive this one, either, but not because of a broken heart. This time, it's pride, betrayal, and the slow erosion of trust that'll unravel you. Robert Dudley, Earl of Essex, enters the Queen's life like a comet flaring through a dusty sky. He's the stepson of Robert Dudley, which already makes things awkward. But more than that, he's bold, young, reckless, A mirror held up to Elizabeth's aging sovereignty. She takes to him immediately, perhaps out of nostalgia, or perhaps because he's the only one brave or foolish enough to tease her. He calls her my fair lady. She calls him Robin. That alone sends the court into convulsions. Here's your historical anchor. Essex becomes the Queen's favourite almost overnight, appointed Master of the Horse, showered with titles, entrusted with diplomatic missions. He kisses her hand before all to see. Once, he even bursts into her private chamber before she's finished dressing a scandal. Yes, but she doesn't exile him. She laughs. Some call it maternal affection, others dangerous flirtation. One fringe claim insists they shared a secret wedding in her private chapel. Highly unlikely, though the very persistence of that rumour says plenty. Historians still argue whether the Queen truly loved Essex in the romantic sense. Was it desire? Projection? Was she simply using him as a political counterweight? What's certain is this: they needed each other for affection, attention, and validation. But oh, you can feel the tension curdling already. Essex is no Dudley. He's ambitious, arrogant, recklessly political. He wants power, not just proximity to it. And Elizabeth, she's no longer in the mood to indulge boys in embroidered hose. Their quarrels become legendary. One day, she slaps him for insolence. Another, he turns his back on her mid-audience, and yet she forgives, over and over, until Ireland, ah yes, that cursed appointment in 1599, Elizabeth sends Essex to suppress a rebellion in Ireland. It's an honour and a trap. He sees it as a way to earn glory. She sees it as a test. He fails spectacularly. He disobeys orders, wastes money, negotiates truces she didn't authorize. Worst of all, he comes home abandoning his post, riding into her bedchamber again unannounced. This time, she doesn't laugh. She sends him to the Tower. For weeks, he sulks in disgrace. Then, in one final, desperate move, Essex does the unthinkable. He attempts a coup. Yes, a real one. In 1601, he and a ragtag group of supporters storm into London, calling for the Queen's removal. They believe the public will rise with them. Spoiler, the public does not rise. Within 12 hours, he's arrested, and now you're sitting beside Elizabeth at her writing desk, the ink trembling in her quill. She's signing his death warrant. The man she once doted on, kissed, perhaps even loved, is going to the scaffold. Eyewitness accounts say she hesitated, that her hand lingered, that she wept after the execution, but Essex is beheaded. Gone just like that. One historian notes she kept a miniature of him hidden behind a curtain. Another says she had a lock of his hair pressed into a locket. No one agrees. But something inside her closes after that. You can feel it. No more favourites, no more games. She becomes harder, more theatrical. Her gowns grow heavier, her speeches more controlled. The Virgin Queen myth calcifies. No one touches her now. No one dares. And yet, her court is littered with shadows of those who tried. The ghost of Dudley still lingers in her antechamber, and ring is hidden in a drawer. Essex's name is not to be spoken, though sometimes. You think you hear it in the rustle of her curtain at night. She walks alone more often now. Through cold gardens, past hedges trimmed into lions and roses, and in one of those garden walks, you catch her looking toward the horizon, not in morning, but in morning light, the kind that's beautiful only because it's fading. I have Loved, she might whisper, if anyone dared to ask, but not wisely, and certainly not safely. You trail behind her, silent as her regrets. The fan from earlier stirs again, and the air in her chamber smells faintly of old lavender and secrets. No one speaks aloud. You stand in the long gallery again, where the light drips through mullioned windows like honey over cold stone. But the Queen doesn't notice. She sits with her back to the view edge now, the paint on her cheeks beginning to crack just a little at the edges. Her red wigs are heavier, her corsets tighter. The more time passes, the more layers she adds. You'd think it was fashion, but no, it's armor. You see, by now, Elizabeth has become something else entirely. Not woman, not monarch, but myth. The Virgin Queen. The living icon, and this is the section where her body stops belonging to her. Let's not be too gentle about it. She chose this image, shaped it, weaponized it. But it's also a cage, and it's getting smaller every year. You remember when they called her the new Deborah, a sacred ruler untouched by sin. It was all fun and flattering until Parliament started demanding that she stay celibate on principle, as in a whole nation building its political identity around whether or not she keeps her knickers on. Sounds stressful. Yeah, you probably won't survive this bit either. Your historical fact anchor here. By the late 1580s, Elizabeth was actively styling herself as married to England. No consort, no heirs, just a nation of subjects, none of whom were allowed to ask how she really felt about that. She celebrated the idea with poetry and portraits. Nicholas Hilliard painted her with celestial orbs, snakes of wisdom, eyes and ears embroidered into her gown. You know, totally subtle, but here's the uncomfortable truth. She was never truly left alone. Her privy chambermaids reported on her moods. Her doctors speculated constantly about her reproductive system. There was a whole industry of foreign spies trying to figure out whether her monthly courses had stopped, or if she'd ever had a secret miscarriage. Fringe rumor alert. One Spanish pamphlet claimed she was actually a man in disguise. Another said she gave birth to a deformed child who lived locked in a tower. People are wild, and yet Elizabeth never publicly addressed her virginity. Not directly, she just leaned into the mystery. Historians still argue whether she remained chaste by choice or whether the performance was more important than the reality. There's no diary entry to confirm either way. No confession, just layers of artifice and a whole lot of dangerous poise. Imagine the pressure. Every step she took had to support the illusion. Even her makeup turned symbolic. That white lead paste. She wore the same stuff Venetian courtesans used. It covered blemishes, yes, but it also made her look like a ghost. A living marble statue, perfect, untouchable, slowly poisoned from the outside in, which in a way kind of sums things up. And yet, men still circled her up for stupidity, or just playing politics. You walk past a tapestry-lined hallway, hear them whispering about her behind velvet screens. Francis Bacon, a little too clever for his own good. The young Earl of Southampton, beloved by Shakespeare and admired by half the court. Even her old favourite Sir Walter Ralegh, who wrote her poems and named whole colonies after her, secretly married one of her maids in defiance. He was thrown. In the Tower too, of course, but Elizabeth never stops ruling. That's the part people forget. While her body becomes state property, her mind stays terrifyingly sharp. She's fluent in 6 languages. She writes translations of classical texts for fun. She memorizes speeches. She holds court with ambassadors. until midnight. Once, a Polish envoy dared interrupt her. She stared him down so hard he supposedly stumbled backward into a candelabra. So no, she's not passive in any of this. She's building her own legend in real time. But here's the bit that makes your chest ache. For all her mastery, she seems lonely, and not in the poetic, candlelit, poor me kind of way. More in the actual no one can touch me, no one dares kiss me, no one sees me kind of way. In her later years, her favorite moments seem to happen in shadowed corners. A private harpist, a secret note from a loyal maid, a piece of violet silk hidden in a book. Things that remind her she is still flesh. Not icon, but the world doesn't want Elizabeth the woman anymore. They want Gloriana, the fairy Queen. So she gives them what they want through elaborate mask balls, progressions across the countryside, and stiff-lipped appearances on her golden throne. Her gowns now weigh over 40 pounds. The pearls on her bodices outnumber the stars visible over London, and still, beneath it all, she breathes at night. When the musicians stop playing and the courtiers sleep in their chilly feather beds, she sometimes removes the wig, unhooks the corset, wipes off the paste. You catch a glimpse of her in the mirror, not weak, not broken, but tired, because holding a nation in your arms while pretending not to want to be held in return. That's exhausting. You'll walk with her again soon, but tonight, just sit on the footstool near her chair. Listen to the quiet tick of the long case clock, watch the candle flicker against her bare cheek, and try not to ask what it cost her. She wouldn't tell you anyway. You're standing in the Tower of London now? No, not locked up. Not quite, but it smells of damp stone, scorched tallow, and something faintly metallic. History doesn't leave this place, just soaks into the walls. And tonight, you've come to visit one man who could have changed everything. If only he'd stayed patient. The year is 1601. Robert Dudley, 2nd Earl of Essex, Elizabeth's final great favourites, about to gamble everything on a single desperate act. You remember Essex, right? Dashing, arrogant, 20 years her junior, and stupidly charming. He first caught Elizabeth's eye around 1584, when he swaggered into court in boots too tall and confidence too loud. She called him her naughty boy. He called her his fair mistress. It was all poetry and posturing, until it wasn't. Your historical fact: Elizabeth gave Essex a seat on her Privy Council, military command in Ireland, and even the sweet privilege of storming into her bedchamber unannounced. That last one, technically treasonous. But for a while, he got away with everything. And then, spoiler, you don't. Because this story, unlike the ones with Dudley and Hatton, ends in blood. It begins, as so many terrible things do, with war. Elizabeth sends Essex to quell rebellion in Ireland, but instead of fighting, he makes a private truce and gallops home dusty, defiant, and very much unauthorized to explain himself. He bursts into her chambers while she's dressing, no wig, no corset, no war paint, just a frail, aging woman, in a robe, startled into silence, and Essex. He laughs. That moment cracks something between them. He's banished from court. His sweet monopoly contracts are revoked. His debts pile up. And rather than, reflect or apologize, Essex starts plotting. Here's where it gets spicy. Essex gathers a group of disgruntled nobles, actors, and opportunists. He tries to stage a coup. He funds a special performance of Richard II, Shakespeare's play about overthrowing a monarch, to drum up sympathy. Then he arms a few hundred followers and marches through London, yelling about rescuing the Queen from corrupt advisers. Londoners don't respond. His rebellion fizzles out in a few hours. He's arrested, tried, and condemned to death. But wait, it gets worse. Fringe fact time. Before his execution, Essex supposedly asked for a private meeting with Elizabeth. She refused, but then locked herself away for days, refusing to eat. Some say she kept a miniature of him beside her mirror, even after the axe had fallen. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth truly loved him, or whether she saw in him the final spark of a life slipping through her fingers. Either way, she signs the warrant. He's beheaded on Tower Green. It takes 3 strikes. You pace that square, now teeny, too small for legend's end. Hear the thud of each stroke like distant thunder, not loud but final. And yet this isn't just about Essex. It's about Elizabeth, standing in her palace, mourning another man she once trusted, another flame extinguished, another piece of herself boxed away under the label too dangerous to feel. Because here's what no one tells you. By this point, she's surrounded by ghosts. Dudley is long dead. Hatton died clutching a miniature of her likeness. Walsingham is gone. Burleigh too. Her closest confidants have either died, betrayed her, or drifted into silence. All she has left are mirrors, and she's starting to avoid those. One made records that she refuses to have reflective surfaces in her chamber. When forced to confront her reflection, she weeps. She begins speaking more to her ladies than to her ministers. Her appetite fades. She doesn't sleep, and still she rules. England thrives. Trade with the East expands. The arts explode. Shakespeare, writes Hamlet, the colonies plant roots, in Virginia named, of course, for her. But beneath that glowing legacy, you feel the weight of something unspoken. She's 67, now unmarried, childless, the crown heavy with decades of decisions and silence, and no one dares ask her, did it hurt? Do you miss love? Do you wish you had lived just a little for yourself? Instead, they call her glorious. You see her walk into the Hall of State, stiff-backed, dressed in silver gauze and armor-piercing pearls, and every man in the room bows so low his nose touches the flagstones. And yet, not one of them sees her. Not really. Not the woman who once twirled with Dudley in moonlight. Not the girl who slept beside a dagger. Not the queen who couldn't cry over her last favourites. Body not in public, anyway. No, they see the myth, the legend, the creature she crafted with terrifying precision. And maybe that was always the plan, still. As the torches flicker against the tower's blackened stones, and you step lightly over Essex's remembered footsteps, you wonder, when did she stop dreaming? And did she even notice? You're inside Richmond Palace now, and it smells like winter. The hearths are burning, but the air is tinged with the sour weight of damp wool and rosemary smoke. Courtiers tread softly in the corridors, as though the Queen might crumble if startled, and honestly, she might. You haven't seen Elizabeth this way before. She's shrinking, not just in body though, that too. Her teeth ache, her hair thins, her famous gowns hang loose on her frame. But what startles you most is how she's begun to disappear behind her silence. Whole conversations now go unanswered. Her ladies say she speaks only in whispers, and even those are mostly to herself. And then there's the pile of pillows on the floor. This is your quirky fringe detail tonight. In her final days, Elizabeth refuses to lie in bed. She insists on standing or else sitting on cushions in the corner, near the fire, cloaked and still. When they ask her why, she says, "If I lay down, I will not rise again." And she's probably right. You watch her, now curled in that strange throne of softness, eyes distant but fierce. No crown, no paint, just a woman staring at the fire, as if it might whisper secrets. The throne has no heir. That's the pressing issue. For 44 years, Elizabeth refused to name a successor. Why? Because the moment she picked one, she became disposable. Histories full of monarchs smothered before their time by those too eager to replace them. So she waited, outlasted them, outlived nearly every pretender, and now there's only one man left worth mentioning. James of Scotland, son of her beheaded cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. You remember Mary the One, Elizabeth imprisoned for 19 years, then finally executed in 1587. After endless hesitation and a signature she may have never truly forgiven herself for. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth was haunted more by Mary's ghost or her own guilt. But here's a chilling thought. Mary bore a son. Elizabeth did not. And now it's his name being whispered in royal chambers. James Stuart, King of Scots, Protestant enough, diplomatic, brilliant even, and most importantly, male. Because let's not pretend England's nobles are eager to crown another woman. One Elizabeth is miracle enough. They're not lining up for a sequel, so the offers are made. Quietly, one by one, courtiers begin corresponding with James, sending assurances, offering loyalty. The wind shifts, Elizabeth knows. You can tell by the sudden weight in her silences, the way she watches each of her men as if wondering how long before they stop bowing. And she's not wrong to worry. Even her closest allies, like Robert Cecil, son of her great advisor, William, have begun making contingency plans, but still, she says nothing, even on her deathbed. Yes, spoiler, we're nearly there. Elizabeth never names him aloud. That silence, it's one final act of control, of resistance, or maybe pride, maybe all three, because even now, she's not just Elizabeth, the Queen, she's Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the fairy monarch who ruled an empire of myths and mirrors. Naming a successor breaks the spell. It tells the world that the story ends, and she's not ready to close the book. Still, her body betrays her. In March of 1603, she falls gravely ill. No one dares name the sickness. No physician can touch her. She waves them off with a trembling hand and sits hunched in her nest of cushions, eyes bloodshot, lips cracked. Some nights she cries out in her sleep words no one understands. Maybe names, maybe regrets, maybe nothing. But here's your mainstream fact. On March 24th, 1603, around 3 in the morning, Queen Elizabeth I dies, quietly in that same corner, surrounded by women too afraid to speak. She was 69 years old, and with her last breath, the Tudor dynasty ends. Cecil and the council act fast. They declare James of Scotland king. Couriers ride north with the news before the Queen's body is even cold. But here's what they don't tell you as they rush. To crown a man, they wrap the Queen of England in lead. Her body is placed in a wooden coffin, then sealed in a hearse draped with black velvet. Thousands gather to see her final procession through London. White horses, black banners, the tolling of bells, and high atop the funeral carriage, her effigy young, painted, serene. Not the Elizabeth who crouched on cushions, not the woman who lost everyone she loved, but the icon, perfect, eternal, untouched. And that, maybe, is what she wanted to be. Remembered not as a woman who broke or aged, but as a monarch who endured. One last detail, the crown atop her coffin. It keeps slipping as the procession moves. No one dares fix it, so it sits tilted lopsided on her velvet canopy. You could read that as a mistake, or as a metaphor. Either way, her reign is over. But her shadow, that lingers, you still feel her. In every cold stone corridor, in every thunderclap of ceremonial drums, in every woman who dares to speak, to rule, to choose solitude over submission. Because while kings are born, Elizabeth was made from fire, fear, and fierce refusal. And that legacy, that's the part that never dies. You don't move, because honestly, you're still sitting in the echo of Elizabeth's last breath. The fire has long gone out, the velvet draped, the leaden coffin sealed, but her presence, like the scent of old roses, clings to the air long after her body is gone. And yet, the court doesn't have the luxury of mourning. They shift instantly, almost comically, toward him. King James VI of Scotland. Now James I of England. It's March 1603. You're riding fast, now figuratively, sure, but also quite literally if you're one of the royal messengers thundering north with Cecil's carefully worded letters. And behind those scrolls and wax seals, a delicate truth unfurls. The English crown is being handed to a man raised in another country, steeped in different politics, language, and even religious nuance. You're not watching a neat succession, you're watching a transfer of power sewn together with quill strokes, bribes, and a deep hope that nobody panics, because James, he's not exactly a sure thing. Here's your mainstream historical fact. James VI of Scotland had ruled that country since he was 13 months old. A child king, a puppet of regents, a survivor of endless assassination attempts and noble betrayals. The man knew how to play politics, but England was a different beast. A beast raised on the image of a virgin queen and a church free from Rome. Could James wear that crown without toppling everything? Historians still argue whether he was the right choice or merely the only viable one. But that doesn't stop the momentum. The minute Elizabeth dies, the letters are sent. The Privy Council signs off. James is declared king, even before his feet touch English soil. Now you find yourself in Edinburgh Castle, and James is trying not to look smug. He'd waited for this moment his entire life, not just for the English throne, but for legitimacy, for respect. Remember, he was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, a woman disgraced, imprisoned, executed. For years, James had tiptoed around Elizabeth's power like a boy eyeing a locked door. Now that door has flung open, and he doesn't just walk through it, he storms in. But let's pause for your quirky tidbit. On his journey south, James reportedly handed out so many titles and favors to hopeful nobles that he earned the nickname the wisest fool in Christendom. Flattering? Not really. It's a phrase loaded with sarcasm, coined by the French. They were watching too. Everyone was, because this wasn't just about thrones and treaties. This was about England's soul. Would it remain Protestant? Would it drift closer to Scotland's Calvinism, tilt toward Catholic sympathizers, still hiding behind lace and incense? And most importantly, would James uphold Elizabeth's legacy or erase it? The answer is ... murky. James does things differently. For one, he's deeply intellectual, obsessively so. He fancies himself a scholar king, always scribbling treatises on kingship, witches, And tobacco, yes, he hated it, called smoking a custom loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose. But while his mind is sharp, his presence isn't. Elizabeth, you notice it immediately. Where Elizabeth captivated, James lectures. Where she dazzled in pearls and poetic silence, he paces awkwardly, muttering Latin under his breath. His court is colder, blunter, less wrapped in illusion and more in bureaucratic grind. Even the Queen's former favourites, those brilliant men who flirted and fought in her name struggle to find footing here, because James brings his own favourites. Oh, yes, we'll get to them. But right now, you're watching London prepare for a coronation that feels almost subdued. James isn't even in the capital yet, but streets are being swept, windows scrubbed, church bells tested. The people are cautiously curious. They'd feared civil war upon Elizabeth's death, but the transition has been bloodless, surprisingly smooth. That doesn't mean they're sold on him. They whisper, they compare, they wonder, will this king protect England from the Spanish menace? Will he charm them like Gloriana once did, or rule from behind velvet curtains and suspicious friendships? You sense the shift as a physical thing, like the light changed, like the tapestries don't quite hang right anymore. Still, the machinery of monarchy grinds on. The coronation is scheduled for July 1603. That summer, England will crown its first male monarch in over 40 years. The Virgin Queen is gone. Long live the king. And while James prepares to cross the border, his agents Grisipum Sharpids start making calls, sorting allies from enemies, rewriting the court from the bones up. But here's what they can't erase: Elizabeth's ghost. It lingers everywhere. You see it in the eyes of elderly courtiers who flinch when they hear a Scottish accent. You hear it in the cautious way Parliament frames its loyalty. As long as the Crown respects the people's liberties, they say, as long as it's like it was under her. You feel it when someone passes the Great Armada portrait in the palace gallery and can't quite bring themselves to take it down. There are rumours, of course, whispers that Elizabeth named James in secret. Others insist she refused until her dying hour. Some say her soul can't rest because a Stuart sits on her throne. And some say she never died at all, that she sleeps beneath Westminster, that she waits tonight. You know better. She's gone. But she left a stage no one else can quite fill. And as James approaches London, carriage wheels crunching dust, you wonder not if he'll rule, but if England will ever truly forget her. You're already on edge when the horses arrive. James has finally made it to London, and the city, holding its collective breath for months, lets out a cautious exhale, then immediately sucks it back in, because he is not what they expected. You're there, pressed into the crowd along the Strand as the new king parades through, cloak flapping, beard untrimmed, expression somewhere between smug and constipated. The people cheer, because that's what they're supposed to do, but there's an unmistakable wince to it, like when someone hands you lukewarm ale and insists it's refreshing. You try to like him, really, but he's awkward in all the places Elizabeth was regal, where she once walked with careful grace. James bounces with gangly steps, muttering back at courtiers instead of casting elegant silences. You remember Elizabeth's theatricality, her measured glances, the oratory daggers she could toss with a single eyebrow. James lectures a lot, and yet this is your king now. Here's your mainstream historical fact. James I's coronation took place on July 25, 1603, in Westminster Abbey. However, due to a sudden outbreak of the plague, many traditional festivities were cancelled, and attendance was limited. an omen, or just London being London? Historians still argue whether the coronation was a cautious triumph or a ceremonial dud. But the change is official now. The Tudor age is over. Or so it seems, because, despite James's Scottish accent echoing through royal halls and his thick books about divine right littering the bedchambers, you can still feel Elizabeth's long shadow at every turn, especially when it comes to the men. Oh, yes. That brings us to a very particular shift, because while Elizabeth's court was filled with witty sparring, masked flirtations, and subtle manipulations, James's court has one glaringly visible feature: his favourites, specifically one favourite, Robert Ralegh. Imagine this. You're attending your first formal banquet under James's rule. You expect the king to give some awkward toast, maybe spill wine down his ruff. Instead, your gaze is pulled to the golden-haired young man seated just a bit too close to the throne. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. He's beautiful, he's blank, and he's being groomed right. Before your eyes, Carr is a Scottish page who caught James's attention after falling from a horse during a tournament. James obsessed with chivalry, beauty, and oddly tender rescues plucked him from the dust and never let go. Carr can barely read. He knows nothing of statecraft. But that doesn't matter. James lavishes him with titles, land, and affection that grows increasingly hard to explain away. Here's your quirky tidbit. James once wrote Carr letters filled with such florid, intimate language that many courtiers began referring to him as the king's mistress behind closed doors. One line famously read, "I desire only to live in your sight and die in your arms." Do you feel the room shift? Because everyone else does. Nobles bristle, advisers mutter, even Parliament, that reliable maze of sycophants, begins to squirm. Not because Carr is male, though that certainly stirs rumours, but because he interferes with politics, with favours, with everything, and yet James doesn't seem to care. Where Elizabeth was careful to never confirm any affair, always keeping her private life cloaked in myth, James all but flaunts his. He creates a court of intimacy, of whispered influence, of dangerous proximity. But here's the key difference, and why you still miss Gloriana so fiercely. Elizabeth controlled her men. James is ruled by them. And it doesn't stop with Carr. Soon there's another George Villiers, the future Duke of Buckingham. Slim, calculating, prettier than any portrait could contain. He arrives just as Carr begins to fade, as if the king is auditioning replacements for the part of most adored. Villiers is smarter, more ambitious, and far more dangerous. He learns how to navigate court life with deadly grace, playing factions against each other, whispering into the king's ear with that calculated gentleness that makes even hardened statesmen sweat. Villiers' rise is meteoric. He becomes the gatekeeper to power. Even foreign ambassadors learn quickly. If you want anything done in England, you go through him, James. He calls him Steenie, short for Stephen, the name of the first Christian martyr, because, of course, he thinks Villiers is suffering for being so perfect. You're not even kidding by now. You realize something critical. Where Elizabeth's court was a stage performative, poetic, symbolic, James's court is a chessboard. Every piece moves with advantage in mind. Intimacy has become a form of policy, and favoritism. That's the new diplomacy. It's not about subtle flirtations anymore. It's about access, about who gets to sit beside the king when treaties are discussed, about who gets the king's laugh, the king's signature, the king's trust. It's about pillow talk politics. Still, you wonder, was Elizabeth's court really that different? After all, didn't she elevate her own favourites Dudley, Essex, Hatton? Didn't she dangle favour like a jewelled hook? Historians still argue whether her romantic abstinence was real or just ruthlessly strategic. But in your bones, you know the truth. She never let it control her. That's the difference. You look around the new court glittering, sharp, whisper thick. You feel something else now. Something less enchanted, less majestic. The myth is gone. The game is real, and the players, well, they're just getting started. You stand in a palace corridor that once echoed with Elizabeth's voice. Now, it smells like damp velvet and scotch. The new king's laughter filters through the walls, a sharp contrast to the controlled, calculated silence that once reigned. Here, it's jarring, like seeing someone else wearing her crown. Her perfume lingers faintly in the old hangings, but her presence, that's fading, and you're clinging to threads. Because while James fills his halls with young men and northern accents, a few of Elizabeth's old allies still haunt the court like stubborn ghosts. Chief among them, Robert Cecil. Yes, that Robert Cecil. The hunchbacked master of secrets. He's aged a decade in 3 years, but his pen is still sharp, and his instincts razored. Elizabeth trusted him to run her intelligence network. James tolerates him for his competence, but Cecil sees what you see. The games haven't stopped, they've just changed shape. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Robert Cecil orchestrated the smooth transition of power from Elizabeth to James, drafting secret correspondence months before her death to secure James's succession and prevent civil war. Without him, the Tudor Stuart shift might have looked like a bonfire. He's still playing. Puppet, master, barely dot. But what he can't control is the rising influence of a strange figure, one whose name was rarely whispered in Elizabeth's day. Frances. Howard, or yes, her daughter of the powerful Howard family, married off young to Robert Devereux, the 3rd Earl of Essex, the son of that Essex, Elizabeth's doomed favourite. And let's be clear, Frances is beautiful in the way that makes poets weep and old men do very stupid things. James's court is obsessed with her. You see her glide through the chambers like she owns them. Her gown's a touch to daring, her smile razor thin. She's no Elizabeth she doesn't want to be. Frances isn't playing the Virgin Queen card. She's playing something darker, something hungrier. Here's the fringe tidbit. Frances reportedly carried a sachet of powdered beetles in her corset, which she believed enhanced her allure. The court whispered she smelled faintly of spice and iron. She hates her husband. By the way, that's no secret. Their marriage, arranged when she was a child, is unconsummated. There are anatomical rumours about young Essex. You hear things you can't unhear. The point is, Frances wants out, and fast. Enter Robert Carr. Yes, the same Robert Carr, the king's favourite. Frances sets her sights on him, and suddenly, court life becomes less about poetry and more about poison. They begin a secret affair, and you know what's coming next, don't you? She files for annulment. Now, in Elizabeth's time, that would have been scandalous enough, but under James, everything's messier. Frances claims Essex is impotent. She even brings in midwives to inspect her body and prove her virginity because, of course, that's how the legal system works when you're a noblewoman in 1613. Historians still argue whether Frances manipulated the trial or was manipulated herself. Some believe the annulment was orchestrated by her powerful family. Others think she did it purely to be with Carr. Regardless, it works. She wins. Essex is humiliated. Francis marries Carr, and that's when the real blood starts to spill. Because, suddenly, Sir Thomas Overberrica's close advisor turns up dead in the Tower after refusing to support the match. You knew Overberry, didn't you? Sharp mind, sharp tongue. A little too clever for his own good. Turns out, he was poisoned. And it doesn't take long before rumors swirl. Frances did it. Not personally, of course. That would be gauche. But she had access and influence. And a very willing set of underlings. You're there when the trials begin, courtrooms packed, eyes glittering, everyone praying not to be next. Francis eventually confesses, so does Carr. They're sentenced to death, but here's where the plot thickens like bad pudding. James pardons them both. Francis is imprisoned for a few years, then quietly released. Carr fades into obscurity. The court never quite forgets, though. You certainly don't. Because this wasn't how things used to be. Under Elizabeth, you remember scheming, yes. Drama, absolutely. But murder. Barely veiled power plays involving seduction, annulment, and death by poison. That's new. You think back to the days of Elizabeth and Dudley. Their dances of almost love, of unspoken longing. Dangerous, but contained. Romantic, even in their denial now. Love is a weapon. Marriage, a battlefield. Intimacy, a currency that buys death. And Frances? She walks free. You spot her once, years later, in the gardens at Greenwich, alone. Her beauty faded into something leaner, paler. You watch her pause beneath a tree, fingers trailing a low branch like she's still trying to charm something, anything, into submission. You don't speak. What would you say? She turns, doesn't see you, walks on. The poison never quite leaves, and in that moment, you miss Elizabeth like a knife to the ribs. Not because she was kind, she wasn't, but because she knew the cost of desire. She wore her crowned like a helmet. Francis wore hers like bait, and the kingdom, it still bleeds. The scent of lavender lingers, but it's cloying now more mask than comfort. You sit in the dim remnants of what used to be Elizabeth's inner bedchamber. The tapestries are changed. The fire doesn't crackle the way it used to. The Queen is dead. Long live the court gossip. Because just when you thought the scandals might settle after all, the poisoners are gone, the favourites exposed. The heirs secure and other old name drifts in like a ghost. Arbella Stuart. Yes, her again. If Elizabeth had ever chosen to name a successor, spoiler, she didn't. Arbella might have had a shot. A royal bloodline through Margaret Tudor, a soft voice, and a tragic face. But Elizabeth saw her as a threat and locked her down tight. James, too, kept her close but never too close. You recall Arbella's letters, her desperate politeness, her stifled ambitions. She wasn't built for the snake pit. Or maybe she was, and it just broke her too early. Here's your historical anchor. Arbella Stuart was once considered a serious contender for the English throne, even by foreign courts. Her claim was legitimate enough that both Elizabeth and James feared her as a potential rallying point for rebellion. But tonight, we're not dealing with rebellion. We're dealing with love, because Arbella falls for a man, and not just any man, William Seymour. If your Tudor senses just twitched, you're not wrong. Yes, Seymour as in Jane Seymour. William is the grandson of Edward Seymour, the brother of Queen Jane, Henry VIII's third wife. That puts him squarely in the royal succession, just like Arbella, which means their union. A bomb waiting to go off. And guess what they do? They get married. In secret, cue the collective gasp of every paranoid courtier from here to Buick. You're there the night the whispers start. The candles are low, and the wine is sour. Someone snorts into their goblet. If they have a child, it'll have a better claim to the throne than James. Not wrong, the king is livid. Orders go out before sunrise. William is thrown into the Tower. Arbella shuttled to house arrest, then another, then another. Like a dangerous artifact no one dares smash. But no one wants loose either. Here's the fringe tidbit. During her confinement, Arbella reportedly refused to eat for days at a time, not as a hunger strike, but out of sheer heartbreak. She believed she'd never see William again. And for the most part, she was right. But not at first, because Arbella decides she's not going to take this lying down. She plans an escape. You can hardly believe it yourself when you see the coded letters. Tiny writing between the lines of scripture. Instructions on when and how to flee. She dresses as a man, a sailor no less, and makes it nearly to the coast. Historians still argue whether the escape plan failed because of betrayal or bad timing. One courier missed, one wind too weak, one carriage too slow. She's captured before she can board the ship, dragged back. This time they throw her in the Tower, and you visit, just once. You walk slowly, past guards who look everywhere but at your face. You expect chains and tears. What you find is worse. Silence. Arbella stares through you, skinned the color of unlit wax. Her hands tremble when she lifts the goblet, not with fear, with fury. I was born too close, she whispers. To what? You don't ask. The throne, the fire. She won't say more. You don't press, you leave, and the next time you hear her name, it's in a letter sealed in violet wax. Arbella Stewart, dead of self-imposed starvation, alone, unpardoned. UNREMEMBERED. And somehow that stings more than the bloodier deaths. Because unlike Essex or Dudley or Mary Queen of Scots, Arbella didn't gamble for power. She gambled for love, and lost. You walk the gardens afterward. The roses bloom half-heartedly. Somewhere nearby the fountain still runs, its basin filled with pennies and broken wishes. You find a bench, sit and think about Elizabeth, about what she might have said. Perhaps nothing at all. Perhaps she would have turned her face aside and muttered, "Foolish girl." Or maybe she would have understood, because if anyone knew the cost of loving someone you were never meant to touch, it was her and you. You understand, too. You've seen how love is twisted in the corridors of power, how it's shaped into something sharp, then hidden in a sleeve like a dagger. You remember Elizabeth walking with Dudley in the gardens, never touching, Arbella scribbling verses by candlelight, Francis poisoning a man for passion. You remember, and now it feels like no one else does. You stay on the bench until dusk makes the garden strange again, until the birds fall silent, until you almost forget that, at the heart of every love story in this palace, there is also a funeral. The ghosts here don't scream, they sigh. You can't help it, you're back at court, and something's different. The air tastes of ink and candle smoke. Elizabeth is gone. James wears the crown now, but her shadow, it still stretches long over every corridor and every silence. The rooms feel colder, though the hearths burn as bright. Her portraits remain, but they've been moved lower, off the main staircases. Subtle, quiet burial, but you're not here to grieve. You're here for echoes. Tonight, you wander through Elizabeth's old private gallery, once her sanctuary, her stage, her whispered confession box. You see the worn velvet of the window seats, the golden motes still drifting through the afternoon light. You half expect her to be sitting there, feet tucked up, eyes narrowed in amusement as she listens to some quivering nobleman stumble through a sonnet. She isn't, but you know who is. Lady Mary Fitton, yes, Mary, of the merry eyes and merciless ambition. Her name doesn't echo through most Tudor textbooks, but scratch the surface and she comes clawing back, trailing silk and rumours. She wasn't a queen, not a noble heir, not even a royal mistress officially, but the chaos she caused. Shakespearean, literally. Your historical anchor. Mary Fitton was a maid of honour to Elizabeth I, and for a brief time, the scandal of the court when she became pregnant out of wedlock, likely by William Herbert, Earl of Pembroke. Not impressed yet? Here's your tidbit. Many scholars believe Mary Fitton might have been the elusive dark lady of Shakespeare's sonnets. Oh yes, that dark lady, the one who tempts, destroys, and devours hearts for breakfast. You sit across from her once in the privy chamber, watching her braid and unbraid a lock of her hair, while fending off for admirers and one woman trying not to strangle her with a rough. Mary was electric. Elizabeth reportedly loathed her, and when word reached the Queen that Fitton was with child, boom, banished, tossed from court like a broken chess piece. Herbert refused to marry her. Mary's reputation obliterated. Yet curiously, she didn't disappear. She became something stranger, a wandering comet of scandal and reinvention. She married eventually, lived, danced, laughed too loud at public feasts, and the men. They never stopped writing about her. You stroll past letters, tucked into folios. Men describing her eyes as witchfire, her wit as venom wrapped in honey, but always with awe, always with want. And Shakespeare. He never names her outright, but those sonnets, the ones where love sours, where the poet is both enslaved and enraged, begging for scraps and cursing the very voice that lured him, those are Mary's domain. Historians still argue whether Mary Fitton was ever Shakespeare's lover, or merely a muse he glimpsed in passing. The timelines don't quite match. The evidence is misty, but the spirit, oh, it's there. You wander deeper into the gallery, where her painted likeness hangs, forgotten behind a velvet curtain, not regal, not demure, just defiant. And you ask yourself, not for the first time, how many other women like her were written out, scrubbed clean, replaced with marble queens and powdered saints. You think of the others, Penelope Rich, Frances Walsingham, Helena Snakenborg, all women who lived close to the fire, burned a little, and kept walking. And maybe Elizabeth hated Fitton not just for the scandal, but for being something Elizabeth herself couldn't be. Free, unmarried, unpunished, unrepentant. You turn, brushing past a velvet rope, and catch the scent of lavender Genoese, that scent in these rooms. This time, though, it's tangled with something richer, cardamom, perhaps, or musk, a memory. Or maybe someone else's perfume lingering centuries too long. You move on, pacing the long hallway lined with faces of the forgotten and infamous. For every noble lady smiling coyly, you wonder how many letters she burned, how many secrets she swallowed for survival. Love, here, wasn't a confession. It was a weapon, a trap. a kind of theatre where everyone wore masks and rehearsed betrayals in the mirror. You remember Elizabeth's own words, muttered once in a private moment, words you weren't meant to hear. I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I hold the hearts of stronger men than you will ever know. And wasn't that always the truth? She held them in poems, in portraits, in ruined women like Mary Fitton. And when she let go, they fell like matchsticks. You stop at the window where Elizabeth once stood during a thunderstorm. You picture her, silhouette thin, sharp, braced against the flash. You imagine Mary Fitton watching from behind, eyes bright with curiosity and something harder, not rivalry, not envy, recognition, to women, oceans apart in power, yet bound by the same impossibility, to love without consequence. You close your eyes, the wind outside rises, the gallery creaks, you are alone, but not really, not here, because in these walls are the sighs of 1,000 heartbeats that dared to beat louder than protocol allowed. And you keep walking, you always do. You find yourself now in a room that feels like an afterthought, a forgotten closet of history, but once it pulsed with coded glances and careful breaths. The Queen's personal library, a sanctum lined with ink-stained secrets and hollowed out books meant to hide folded notes rather than philosophies. The smell here is irresistible, old vellum, beeswax polish, a trace of dried rose petals that once kept the moths away. You trail your fingers across the spine of a book bearing no title. It thuds open to a hollowed corno, surprises any Moran tucked inside as a scrap of linen, faded ink, someone's confession, or someone else's trap. You lean in closer. It's a line of poetry in Italian, written by a woman's hand and signed only with the initial C. Tonight you meet Catherine Carey, Elizabeth's cousin maybe, or half-sister, you believe the more delicious version. Born of Mary Boleyn, the Queen's oft-forgotten sister, and possibly the daughter of Henry VIII himself. Historians still argue whether Catherine Carey was truly the king's child. No documents confirm it, but Elizabeth treated her with suspicious generosity, titles, land, and an emotional closeness that Elizabeth rarely permitted. But Catherine isn't tonight's scandal. It's her daughter, Lettice Knowles. If you were hoping for Elizabeth's mirror opposite, it's Lettice. Hair just as fiery, temper just as sharp, wit arguably faster, and one deeply fatal mistake, marrying Robert Dudley, the love of Elizabeth's life. Yes, that Dudley. The one who had his own chamber next to Elizabeth's. The one who kept her entertained for decades with flirtations that were always just barely public. And when Lettice married him in secret, behind Elizabeth's back, let's just say that Virgin Queen's wrath could have melted stone. Elizabeth never forgave her, banished her cousin from court, referred to her as that shave-off, and reportedly refused to even utter her name again. It wasn't just betrayal. It was personal. You pause at a window seat, imagining Lettice reading that poem you found, if not the exact one, then one like it, the ink smudged from trembling fingers, knowing the Queen would hunt her down for love that, frankly, Elizabeth had no right to claim. But power doesn't operate by rights, it operates by silence. And Elizabeth, for all her strength, could not tolerate a reflection that disobeyed. Lettice paid the price, though she lived a long life, outliving both Elizabeth and Dudley. Interestingly enough, she remained in the margins, a ghost at family events, a name struck through with red ink. Her son, the dashing Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, would one day walk the same tightrope of Elizabeth's favour and fall off entirely. But tonight isn't his story. It's lettuces and the sobering reminder that women near power often suffered the most when love entered the room. You move to another shelf and pull out a leather-bound folio. Letters, again this time, folded tightly, cornered in Dudley's own hand. Some to Lettuce, some to Elizabeth, and if you didn't know better, you'd think he was in love with both women. One is full of restrained devotion lines, crafted like courtly poetry, telling Elizabeth she is like the sun to my season. The other is raw, swittier, unmistakably urgent. You can guess which was written to whom, and in that split, you feel the fracture that Elizabeth never healed from, to be adored as a sovereign, but never fully as a woman. The irony. Lettuce may have won the man, but Elizabeth kept his legend. You pace slowly now, your feet aching. The floorboards here are warped by time. Somewhere overhead, a draft murmurs like a voice that can't quite form words. Maybe Catherine Carey is whispering again. Maybe she's trying to warn you about the cost of family when it bleeds too close to the throne. Another shelf, another hidden note. This one unsigned. It reads, "A woman may wear the crown, but never unclasp the heart. The heart will not obey." You pause. Who wrote that? Could have been Lettuce. Could have been Elizabeth. Could have been anyone. You're starting to notice that no one in this story gets what they want. Not entirely. Not without something else falling apart. And yet, they still reach for it, even knowing the Queen might. Scream, exile, or worse still, they love, they dare, they write. You feel oddly close to them. These women who played chess without knowing if they were the queen or the pawn, who flirted while knowing it might cost them their freedom, who gave birth to sons who might one day rebel and did. They weren't fools, they were survivors, and in Elizabeth's presence, survival was a kind of brilliance, one that flickered out if you stared too long. You leave the library with a final glance back at the high windows and the creaking wooden ladders that once held girls half your age, dreaming of poems and punishments. You wonder how many fell in love here. You wonder how many still haunt the margins of these volumes, waiting for someone like you to turn the right page. The latch clicks behind you, another secret closed. For now, your feet echo down a narrower hallway, now one that seems to fold in on itself. The air shifts. The tapestries lining the walls grow heavier, the light dimmer, and there's a lingering perfume, bitter orange peel and myrrh. You follow it instinctively, and before long, you arrive at a chamber unlike any you've seen before. No throne, no embroidery frames, just stone. Plain, cold, echoing stone, and in the center a table, long, wide, littered with scrolls and wax. Seals, maps inked in black and crimson, showing Europe cleaved into tensions and empires. And in the corner, of course, stands a locked box. This isn't a love letter kind of room. This is a room where love gets erased. Welcome to the Privy Council chamber. And tonight, you witness how Elizabeth used romance as a political weapon, and how that game eventually swallowed one of the most scandalous names of her reign. Yes, John de Simier, the so-called monkey of the French court. It was an insult cloaked in familiarity. He was short, clever, endlessly charming, and sent directly by the French to flirt with the most dangerous woman in England. Simier wasn't just a diplomat, he was bait. His mission, woo Elizabeth on behalf of Francois, Duke of Anjou, the younger brother of the King of France, a Catholic prince, a foreign suitor, and 24 years her junior. You pause for a moment. 20-4. Let that sit. Elizabeth, pushing 50. Francois, 26. It would have made her the subject of ridicule had she not expertly flipped the script. She leaned into it, flirted, openly called him her frog. And to the astonishment of nearly everyone, especially her own council, she actually seemed to fall for him. Or did she? Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's affection for Anjou was sincere or just dazzling. Theatre to keep Spain off balance. By entertaining a French marriage, she kept Philip II twitching in his ruffled collar. England stayed unpredictable. Elizabeth stayed powerful, but Seymour, he was something else. Some whispered he was more than just a messenger, that he and Elizabeth met alone late into the night, behind the hangings of this very chamber, that her laughter could be heard down the stone corridor, that she touched his wrist once in public and didn't flinch, in a court obsessed with performance. That meant everything. There were even rumors delicious and dangerous that she called him my monkey, not as mockery, but affection, and that he responded in kind with pet names of his own. Now, whether Seymour truly charmed the Queen, or simply knew which buttons to push, is impossible to know, but it worked. For a while, Elizabeth allowed formal talks. She commissioned a portrait of the Duke. She paraded him around in public, and for the first time in decades, there was genuine terror in the council's eyes. Because if she married this French Catholic, it could end her. Riots were predicted. Nobles threatened to withdraw support. Even the Puritans began drafting fiery pamphlets by candlelight, declaring her betrayal of the realm. But here's the kicker. Elizabeth loved watching them squirm. She knew exactly what she was doing. You trail your fingers across one of the maps on the table, stained with wine from some long-dead argument. France, England, Spain, the triangle of chaos that Elizabeth navigated with a lover's instinct for timing. Always just enough affection to confuse, never enough to commit. Seymour eventually overstepped. He made enemies in the English court, especially with Robert Dudley, who hated the Frenchman's slippery grin and wasn't above spreading rumors of his own. One involved Seymour getting caught sneaking into a masked ball where the Queen had specifically told him not to appear. He came anyway, in crimson satin, no less. Elizabeth slapped him in front of the entire court, then laughed, then dined with him. Alone an hour later. You can't make this up. And yet, even this carefully orchestrated circus began to wobble. When Seymour's master, the Duke of Anjou, actually arrived in England, the dream began to sour. He was charming, yes, but also pockmarked, short, eager to rule and far too forward. At one banquet, he tried to kiss Elizabeth in public. She shoved him gently, and then didn't speak to him for 3 days. You're beginning to realize something. Now, Elizabeth may have flirted with marriage, but she was never going to surrender the one thing it cost, control. In the end, she called off the match. Tearfully, some said, resigned, but not broken. She gave Anjou a ring, a token, and sent him home. He died a few years later, of dysentery, not romantic, and Seymour. He vanished into the folds of history. No execution, no exile. Just poof, gone. Like the smell of bitter orange after the candle is snuffed. You rest your hand on the cold surface of the council table, imagining her here, alone, sleepless, playing for kings against each other with a flick of her fan. People call her the Virgin Queen like it's a mystery, but really, it was strategy. If she'd married, she'd become someone else's, and every lover Seymour Dudley, Anjou Hatton, Every one of them taught her that affection could be given, but not yielded. You turn to leave the chamber, and for a fleeting moment, you swear you hear the echo of a laugh, playful, mocking, triumphant. Simeon's maybe Dot, or perhaps Elizabeth's herself, always 2 steps ahead, always with a mask in one hand and a dagger in the other. The door shuts softly behind you, and the corridor swallows the past once more. The corridors stretch again, this time wider, cooler, dappled with sun from leaded windows. You follow the light, letting it guide you through an antechamber thick with velvet drapes and dust that hasn't settled in centuries. You're nearing Elizabeth's private apartments, now the heart of the hive, the place no foreign diplomat could enter without her express command. And yet, one man walked freely here, well floated, really, glided with the ease of someone whose very presence seemed sculpted for courtly showmanship. Sir Walter Ralegh. Yes, captain of charisma, pirate of poise, colonizer with cologne. You're probably picturing the whole laying his cloak in the mud. Story, yeah, total myth. But effective PR Ralegh didn't just romance the Queen. He romanced the idea of England tall, angular, and always dressed to perfection at one point. In a doublet embroidered with pearls, he cut through the court, like a man who knew his own legend was just beginning. But his secret, he was cleverer than the rest, because unlike Dudley or Hatton, he never tried to marry Elizabeth. He flattered, he listened. He dazzled her with stories of the New World, painted the Americas in gold and cinnamon and paradise. And in return, she gave him power, ships, influence, keys to the kingdom, and some suggester, place in her bed. Historians still argue whether Ralegh and Elizabeth ever crossed that final, forbidden line. Some point to letters, now lost, that hinted at sleepless nights and comforts shared in shadow. Others say Elizabeth was simply too wary by then, too experienced to let another courtier get too close. What is certain is this: Ralegh made her feel young, informed, capable of empire, and she made him feel invincible. That's a dangerous kind of love. You slip behind a linen screen into a smaller chamber now, where Ralegh once read aloud to Elizabeth from the Fairy Queen, the epic poem written by his protege, Edmund Spenser. The Queen adored allegory, especially when she herself was the Star Gloriana, the Virgin Empress, celestial and untainted. That's what Ralegh gave her, mythological reassurance. But remember, this is still a story of forbidden love, and Ralegh, with all his dazzle, had one fatal flaw. He was human. You stop in front of an ornate mirror. It's cracked spider-webbed with age, but your reflection glimmers back, just enough to make you uneasy. That's what happened to Elizabeth when she discovered Raleigh's secret. He'd fallen in love, not with her, with one of her ladies-in-waiting, Elizabeth Bess, Throckmorton young, clever, and dangerously in reach. Ralegh, for all his cunning, made the mistake of loving someone within the Queen's grasp. Worse, he married her in secret. You inhale sharply. Even now, centuries later, the betrayal still feels like a slap, because to Elizabeth, it wasn't about Ralegh choosing another woman. It was about not telling her. It was about trust. And in Elizabeth's court, trust was currency. When you broke it, the whole vault collapsed. She flew into a rage, banned both from court, imprisoned Ralegh in the tower. He wrote her letters, begged, pleaded, said he'd rather rot in chains than live without her favour. And in true Elizabethan style, she kept him dangling, for years. Now here's the twist. This wasn't just personal vengeance, it was political. Elizabeth knew the court, watched her every move. If she forgave Raleigh too quickly, others might dare to deceive her. If she punished him too harshly, she risked appearing weak, jealous. Even so, she staged his redemption, allowed him out, let him reclaim favor bit by bit. But things were never the same again. He became a relic of her past, a living ghost in a gilded frame, and eventually Raleigh would seal his fate on his own. Years later, after Elizabeth's death, he'd defy the next monarch, James the First, by launching an unauthorized expedition. Captured, condemned, beheaded, a man who had once whispered poems to a queen, now left the world with his blood on a block. You linger beside a carved panel where legend claims Raleigh once scratched a message with a diamond ring. Fain would I climb, yet fear I to fall. Elizabeth, so the story goes, scrawled underneath in her own hand. If thy heart fails thee, climb not at all. Real, maybe not, but emotionally dash, devastatingly dash, true dot. Because every man who loved Elizabeth loved a woman they could never truly have. A crown is not a heart. A throne is not a home. And Elizabeth, she loved them back in pieces, in tokens, in power, but never whole. Your fingers graze the fabric of the screen as you exit the room, as though you've touched the echo of something unfinished. The Queen, now older, her favorites fading like dried rose petals, begins to withdraw from those chambers of desire. The laughter softens, the games slow, but the longinger that stays sharp. Still, the corridors wind onward. Still, more shadows wait. You descend now, slow and careful, along a hidden staircase tucked behind the royal chapel. The stone steps narrow with each turn, until your shoulder grazes the wall and your breath fogs slightly in the damp. No guards here, no courtiers, just quiet, like the court has exhaled all its secrets down into this place. This is the realm of ghosts, of whispers unsaid. And tonight, you come face to face with one of Elizabeth's greatest regrets, Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex. The last favorite, the most dangerous. It starts innocently, like a breeze before a storm. Essex is young 20-something, hot-tempered, and blazingly handsome in the way that makes poetry optional. He's the stepson of Robert Dudley. That's already a mark of favor. But he carries it further, launching himself into Elizabeth's orbit like a cannonball made of flirtation and ambition. She's in her 60s. He's nearly 40 years younger. You'd think this would be a comedy of errors. But no, it's drama. The kind with court masks and long gazes, and too much meaning in a single bow. Elizabeth indulges him, promotes him, dotes on him in ways that make the other lords mutter. He calls her my fair and sweet mistress in letters, and once barges into her private chamber while she's still dishevelled from sleep. She lets him live, and that's how you know it's love, or something like it. But Essex is not like Dudley or Raleigh. He doesn't flatter for survival. He plays dangerously, offends people he shouldn't, undermines the council. And worst of all, he thinks he can control her. Historians still argue whether their relationship was ever physical. Some say Elizabeth was too old by then, too distant from desire. Others believe the emotional intensity between them couldn't help but spill over. After all, she gave him command of military campaigns. That's not just affection. That's trust, and trust, by now, has become her most fatal weakness. You emerge into a vaulted room beneath the old palace walls. Candlelight flickers here, reflected in iron sconces. In this chamber once stood the table where Essex wrote his final apology, hands shaking, ink smudged, because his downfall wasn't slow, it was spectacular. First, a failed campaign in Ireland, he defied her orders, negotiated secretly, returned without permission. Then, to make matters worse, he stormed into her presence again, unannounced, saw her without her makeup, her wig, her royal veneer. To a man like Essex, the Queen had become mortal, and to Elizabeth, that moment was betrayal. She never forgave him. He was placed under house arrest, stripped of titles, his monopoly on sweet wine, yes, seriously, sweet wine revoked. That hurt, financially, politically, symbolically. He begged for an audience, she said no, and that's when he made his move. You turn now and enter a hall where the echoes are sharper. This is where it happened, his last desperate gamble, the Essex Rebellion, a bizarre failed coup that lasted less than a day. He rode into London, hoping to raise support, to force the Queen's hand, but no one came. The people watched from windows, his followers scattered. He was arrested, tried for treason. The trial was public, brutal. Elizabeth did not attend, but she didn't need to. She heard every word. When Essex asked to explain himself directly to her, she refused. When he was sentenced to death, she hesitated. Yes, hesitated. This is the part that breaks something in you. Because even after everything, the defiance, the rebellion, the humiliation, she still loved him. She delayed signing the death warrant, held it for days, and some accounts say she hoped he would send her the token she had once given him, a ring, to be returned if he were ever in mortal danger. He didn't, or maybe he tried, and it never reached her. There's a whole legend about that. The Essex ring passed to the wrong hand, intercepted, lost. Historians still debate it. Did she kill the man she loved because of a lost trinket? You walk now to the final door. Beyond it, the scaffold, the axe, a silence broken only by the crowd's murmur. He was beheaded on February 25th, 1601. Elizabeth never spoke his name again. Not publicly, but those close to her said. She changed, became quieter, distant, like a flame flickering low in her last years. She slept on cushions on the floor, refusing her bed. She could not bear the idea of rest or of dreams, or maybe, just maybe, of waking without him in a world that suddenly seemed colder. You pause here in the hush that follows loss, because Essex's story isn't just about downfall. It's about the risk of letting someone in when you've built your whole life on solitude. Elizabeth, mistress of restraint, had let her guard slip, and for that she paid in blood. You trace your hand along the stone wall. It's cold now. The court above moves on. Raleigh is gone, Dudley dead, Hatton faded. Only Elizabeth remains, older, alone, and finally ready to fade with them. The light in the palace is changing now. You feel it first in the tapestry's faded reds, dulled golds. The way the sun through stained glass windows no longer glows, but leans grey and thin, like the breath of an old woman. The Queen has outlived almost everyone who mattered to her, and you, moving softly through these memory-filled corridors, know that the end is near, not in drama or revolt, but in stillness. It's 1602. Elizabeth is almost 70. For a woman who was never meant to rule, she's ruled longer than most. But she is tired, and no longer pretending she isn't. She sleeps less and walks more, through gardens now overgrown, through halls where names echo but don't answer. Her lady's report, she murmurs to herself, and sometimes to people who aren't there. Dudley, Essex, maybe even her mother, Anne Boleyn, whose ghost she has never fully shaken. In her final months, she refuses her bed altogether. She lies instead on cushions piled on the floor of her chamber in Richmond Palace, wrapped in furs, her face hollowed. She will not let them take her to the bed, as if doing so would make her death official. You crouch beside her now, and it's not a monarch. You see, it's a woman bone-tired, exquisitely alert and haunted. Her doctors fuss. Her advisers beg. Your Majesty, you must rest, they say. You must sleep, she replies with silence, or with a hand raised, or sometimes with the quiet muttering of old names. Robin, Raleigh, Hatton, Francis. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth suffered from depression in her final weeks. Some say it was melancholy and imbalance of humours, common in old age. Others insist it was grief, simple, searing grief that finally had no more disguises. After all, she has no children, no siblings left, no consort. She has ruled alone, and now she will die alone, and yet she does not completely fall apart. No deathbed confessions, no sobbing collapse, just a slow dimming, like a candle kept upright by will alone. One of her final visitors is the Archbishop of Canterbury. He comes with prayers and ceremony. She endures it. But when he asks if she still has faith in Christ, she reportedly mutters, "I am tied with a chain of iron." You picture that for a moment. Not a crown, not a robe, but a chain, a heavy one, forged of duty and memory and all those countless mornings when she pulled on her face like armour and stood in front of the realm. On March 24th, 1603, just before dawn, Elizabeth I dies. They say her body was cold hours before it was official, that her ladies stayed with her long after her spirit left, that no one quite knew what to say because what do you say when a reign that defined an era simply ends? You rise, and outside the window the Thames is grey and slow. Bells begin to toll, their sound strangely muted by the mist. Word spreads. London wakes to a world without its virgin queen, and here's the strangest thing the moment she dies. The court doesn't wait. Men race to ride north, to reach James VI of Scotland, her cousin, her successor. The peaceful transfer of power is miraculous but also swift. Elizabeth's body is still warm when her court turns its gaze elsewhere. The Elizabethan age is over, but you're still here, standing among its ashes, and now, at last, you may look back and ask, who was she, really? Was she the political genius who outwitted popes, kings, and assassins? Was she a lonely woman hiding behind symbols and ritual? Or was she like so many women in history, forced to choose between love and power, and then punished either way? That's the question historians still wrestle with, and probably always will. You step now into Westminster Abbey, where Elizabeth lies in state. Her coffin is carried with solemn grandeur, draped in the royal banner. A wax effigy rides atop, painted with startling realism, cheeks, rouged red wig, perfectly set, rough starched, as if the Queen were merely sleeping between audiences. But you know better. Beneath the velvet, beneath the pomp, lies a body scarred by decades of rule. A woman who aged in full view of a court trained to watch for weakness, who dared to rule without a man at her side, who turned heartbreak into policy and loneliness into legend. And here's a strange bit of trivia. She's buried beside her half-sister Mary I, whom she once imprisoned. Their tomb bears the Latin inscription, partners in throne and grave. A historical irony so sharp, you almost laugh. You reach the tomb now, cool marble, weathered letters, and you whisper, because it feels right, just one word, remembered. Because for all the secrets, all the forbidden loves, all the scars and losses, one truth holds. You remember her, and you always will. You remain a little while longer in Westminster Abbey. It's not quiet here. Not really tourists shuffle, camera shutters click, voices murmur in reverence and restlessness. But there's something sacred under the noise. The stillness of legacy, perhaps, or the collective hush of centuries pressing down through the vaulted ceiling. Elizabeth is gone, and yet her presence lingers in strange human ways. A ring on display, a lock of red hair, a faded glove, its fingers still curled as if they miss a sword's hilt or a prayer book. But you're not finished with her just yet, because the love stories don't stop with her death. They echo. You walk now through a different set of halls, those of memory and of speculation. The places where letters were burned, where confessions went unspoken, where truths were sealed with silence. Take Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. He haunts Elizabeth's final years like a wound that won't quite heal. Remember him, the cocky, beautiful favourite who thought he could play the Queen's heart like a lute string. His execution in 1601 was officially for treason, but unofficially it was heartbreak on both sides. And here's the thing, in her last days, Elizabeth wore Essex's ring. You tilt your head at that, don't you? Yes, the same man who raised a rebellion against her. The same man she condemned with a trembling signature. She kept his ring near her, worn on a chain or clutched in her fingers. Historians still argue whether it was guilt, love, or some mix of the two. Some say she'd promised to spare his life if he ever sent the ring back to her as a plea. That he did send it, but it never reached her. That a rival intercepted it. That by the time she knew, it was too late. Fringe theory. Maybe, but the Queen weeps for no one in public hand, yet they say she wept for Essex in private. You followed that tear trail now, to another ghost, Sir Walter Ralegh. Walter. He was a man made of myth, swagger, and impossible ambition. The Queen adored him, not romantically, not exactly, but in that strange, burning way she loved brilliant men who danced close to danger. Ralegh dared to marry one of her maids without permission. Elizabeth imprisoned them both in the Tower. She never fully forgave him, even when she released him later. It was a betrayal of courtly ritual, of intimacy. It's worth pausing here to note the pattern. Every man she loved or nearly loved eventually disappointed her by leaving, by defying, by dying, and so, over time, she let fewer and fewer in. That's the forbidden truth historians don't always write plainly. Elizabeth wasn't just the Virgin Queen by political necessity. She became so by exhaustion, by choice, maybe even by self-protection, and yet, love still clung to her life in peculiar ways. There's the moment, near the end of her reign, when she demands all mirrors be removed from her. Chambers, let that sink in, a woman whose image had once been national propaganda, the Gloriana, the moon goddess, Astrea herself, now refuses to look at her own reflection. What was she afraid to see? The lines, the grief, the past? Or was it that those eyes, once sharp as daggers, now carried too many ghosts? You walk and you wonder. You pass through court records, names scratched out, dates altered, a letter from Francis Bacon speculating on her moods, an ambassador's note describing her gown, a poem written anonymously and slipped under a chapel door. Its verses mourning a queen not yet dead. This is how her loves survive, not in diaries or declarations, but in absence, in silences so loud they hurt. Remember when we began, back in that candlelit chamber, where young Elizabeth clutched a forbidden letter from Thomas Seymour. This is the arc we've traced, from girl to sovereign, from flirtations in shadows to wielding the crown, like a sword, from stolen kisses to sentences of death. And now you stand at the far edge of that life. No more suitors, no more secret exchanges, no more court dances with double meanings, just a nation already slipping into a new era. Stuart, Scottish and male, still. Her fingerprints are everywhere. You see it in the fear of female power that persisted long after she was gone, in the scholars who tried to shrink her into a list of lovers, in the way people still ask, centuries later, but did she really love anyone? You turn to leave the abbey, but just before you do, you glance back, and for a moment only, a moment, you imagine her sitting there, not as queen, not as icon, but as a woman, alone on a cushion, chain of iron across her heart, surrounded by shadows of men she might have loved if history had allowed. And you realize something gentle, but unshakable. She did love. Maybe not like the poets wrote. Maybe not with marriage and babies and long walks in the garden, but fiercely, unforgivably, quietly, and in the end, that love, however forbidden, was hers alone. You linger a little longer in the hush that follows, suspended in that strange space between myth and memory. But time, relentless as ever, nudges you forward, and you obey. You step out of the abbey, back into the air of the living, though your mind still hums with the voice of a woman long dead. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the woman who ruled alone, but never unaccompanied, because her shadows stayed with her lovers, whispered into her silks, danced through her halls, stood behind her throne like ghosts in doublet and hose. They outlived their usefulness, their loyalty, their beauty, and often their lives, but not their place in her story. You walk now into the aftermath of her death. 1603. James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England. The Tudor line is extinguished like the final flame of a candle, its heat still lingering but its light withdrawn. And as the Stuart king takes his throne, there's a sudden effort to rewrite the past, to tidy it up. No more Elizabethan ambiguity. No more flirtations with power or gender or command. The court grows more male, more married, more methodical, and Elizabeth, she becomes a legend almost overnight. They paint her with impossible skin, pure white like marble or milk. They put a globe under her hand, a crown on her head, and erase the smirk from her lips. She becomes not a woman, but a symbol, an idea, untouchable, eternal, which is just a polite way of saying they scrub out her lovers, not the men themselves. Of course, they stay famous in their own right. Leicester, Essex, Ralegh, Seymour, but their connections to her become footnotes, not fire. Even Robert Dudley's last letter, the one she kept in a box, marked his last letter until the day she died. It's often treated as a sentimental flourish, a curiosity, when in fact it's the kind of romantic talisman you or I might keep in a drawer, reread in secret, trace with a fingertip when no one's looking. She was human, you know. That's the most forbidden truth of all. Not the affairs themselves, not the flirts and the poems and the dances, but that she felt. She heard, she craved, she trusted, she betrayed, and she kept going. Historians still argue whether her celibacy was a conscious sacrifice or a convenient myth, whether she was ever truly in love or simply a master of performance, whether her deepest intimacy was not with any man, but with power itself. But maybe, just maybe, none of that matters, because what if the real scandal wasn't who she loved, but how she loved? Fiercely, strategically, tragically, without the safety net of marriage, without the reassurance of heirs, without the permission of her council. She dared to love and reign on her own terms, and in doing so, she broke every rule of her world. Now, here's something fringe for you. There's a theory, unsupported of course, but wonderfully speculative, that Elizabeth kept a final secret. That in her last days she dictated a note to be burned unread, a farewell not to her people, but to someone she never named aloud, a lover, perhaps, or a self she could never fully be. The note was burned, if it ever existed. But that doesn't stop us imagining that, and in the end, isn't that what Elizabeth left us? A space to imagine her, not just the portraits, not just the speeches, but the in-betweens, the moments where her eyes fluttered shut, or her hand lingered too long on a courtier's sleeve, or her voice caught ever so slightly while reading Essex's name aloud. So yes, her love affairs were forbidden by law, by expectation, by fear, but they happened anyway. And maybe, just maybe, that makes them all the more real. You're tired now, I can feel it. The kind of tired that settles behind the eyes and spreads like velvet across the bones. So let's leave her, shall we? Not in Westminster Abbey, not in the Tower, but in that golden light just before sunset, walking alone in her gardens, skirts brushing rose thorns, a letter in her bodice, and a secret in her chest no one will ever quite decipher. That's where she belongs, and that's where we'll leave her. You've made it to the end. Let that story curl around you now, like the hem of a gown across cool stone floors, or the hush that falls after a courtier's last bow. Let your breath slow, let your muscles loosen, because whatever you believe about Elizabeth Urgin Vixen, or venerated sovereign, what matters most is that she was something we rarely allow our icons to be. Unfinished, she didn't leave us with a love story tied in a bow or a legacy free of contradiction. She left questions, echoes, a room full of candle smoke and whispered possibilities, and that's the kind of history that lingers. So take one last deep breath in and let it out slowly. You're safe here. The world can wait. Let the whispers fade. Let the page close. Let Elizabeth slip back into her velvet chamber, where secrets are safe and time moves softly. You did well to walk this far. You really did. Now rest.